His own father sold him to the army at 6 years old. Use the boy as you would a bandage. 2 years later, he walked into this throne room, and he didn't say a word.
I was 6 years old the morning my father found a legal way to kill me. He and Grant called me to the entrance. They were both smiling, which meant something was about to hurt. My father shoved a letter into my hands. The kingdom was at war with the Belfast Empire, he said. Nobles had to contribute resources, soldiers, horses, food. He had decided to contribute me. Grant leaned against the doorframe and told me to find a proper way to die for my country. He said it like it was obvious, like it was already done. I did not cry. I had learned that crying made everything worse. I folded the letter, picked up Slaw from the floor, and walked to the carriage that was already waiting outside. Slaw sat on my lap. Neither of us spoke because there was nothing to say. The road was bumpy and the wood creaked, and I had not been outside the mansion in 3 years. My name is Ken, second son of the Guyon Knight family. My mother Iris died when I was 1. My father is a drunk who never trains. My brother uses me as a punching bag. I sleep in a storage closet. The one person who was ever kind to me was a maid named Hannah, who bandaged my wounds in secret. At age 3, I found a book on magic in the unused study. I taught myself mana circulation, recovery magic, healed my own bruises, my own fractures. Slaw learned too. We survived 3 years that way, in silence. I carry memories of another life, a previous one, in a country called Japan. I was alone in that life too. Died from a sickness with no one beside me. 2 lives, no family in either. At the checkpoint, I stepped out holding the letter the way I had been told to. Slaw perched on my shoulder. The guards stared at me. I must have looked strange. A small boy in patched clothes presenting military paperwork. A tall man came forward. He took the letter and read it. His expression went from neutral to something colder than anything I had seen on my father's face. Not the loud kind of anger, the kind that makes the air feel different. He said his name was Lucas, second prince of the Hawkstar Kingdom. He asked me to come with him. In the reception room, he read the letter again, then a third time. He called for a subordinate and ordered an immediate investigation into my father and brother. Then he sat with me and I told him everything. The closet, the beatings, Hannah, the magic I taught myself, my father telling me to die. Somewhere in the middle, I started crying and could not stop. Lucas did not say anything. He put his hand on my head and left it there until I was done. The next morning, they fed me a real breakfast. My hands shook a little because I was not used to eating that much in a place where no one was going to take it away. I asked the kitchen ladies if I could heal them. One held her shoulder tilted, favoring the left side. I put my hand near it and pushed recovery magic through. The tension drained from her face. I healed all of them. Shoulders, backs, wrists. Small work. It cost me nothing, but they looked at me afterward like I had given them something enormous. Then the ward. 23 cots. Soldiers watched me the way people watch something they are not sure is real. I went to the nearest man, asked where it hurt, and started. Slaw worked beside me. By noon, more than half were standing again. Men who had been lying flat for days were testing their legs, looking down at their own bodies like they did not trust what they were feeling. After lunch, Lucas brought me to a third-floor room. Heavy security, armed guards at every door. Inside, a man lay in a bed with his left arm ending at the wrist. Hector, the king's brother-in-law, a duke. He had lost his hand in an ambush orchestrated by the Empire. Slaw bounced once on my shoulder. That meant yes. We layered recovery magic and holy magic together. The technique I had built from 3 years of secret practice. I pushed everything I had into the space where his hand used to be. Light filled the room. Bone grew first, then tendons, then muscle, then skin. Fingernails last. The room was silent. I could hear the guards outside breathing. Hector lifted his arm. He stared at his new hand, flexed the fingers one by one, made a fist, and opened it. I sat down on the floor because my legs would not hold me. Slaw slid off my shoulder and pressed against my side. Someone handed me juice. I drank it, and the room went blurry around the edges. They brought me to the castle. I remember the elevator because I had read about them in books. I remember Hector holding my hand because my legs were still unsteady. I remember the floor being so polished, I could see my own reflection and thinking I looked very small. King George IV was waiting. Older, muscular, blonde. The kind of face that makes a room go quiet without raising its voice. Queen Lillian stood beside him. Lucas introduced me. The king thanked me. Then he asked what my father and brother said when they handed me the letter. I told him. Flat. like facts. My father said he found a legal way to kill me. My brother said I should die for the country. The king's face did not change, but the room got colder. He said, Ken is under royal protection, assigned to Lucas's command. He will serve as a healer at the border, but he serves the kingdom now, not his father. Lillian took me to the wardrobe. She cut my hair with careful hands, tilting my head this way and that, shaping the ragged edges into something that belonged on a person who was taken care of. She fitted me in a child's military uniform, dark blue, brass buttons, boots that were the right size. Then she said something that made me stop moving. She said she knew my mother, Iris. They had volunteered together at the church. She said my mother was kind and quiet and worked harder than anyone in the room. No one had ever told me anything about my mother before. She was just an absence, a shape I could not see. Lillian said she would be proud of me. I nodded. That was all I could do. The Queen Mother was bedridden, chronic chest pain for years. Slaw and I healed her the same way we had healed Hector, recovery and holy magic layered together. The tight lines in her face relaxed. She sat up for the first time in months. She stood. Then she looked at me and started crying. She opened her arms and I went to her. She held me against her chest and said my mother's name. She said Iris was beautiful and gentle. She said the marriage was wrong, that no one should have forced it. She had carried the guilt for years. I sat in her arms and listened to my mother become real. Not an absence anymore, a person, good, loved by people who still grieved her. She held my face in both hands. After the war, she said, I will take you to the people who knew her. That evening, I ate dinner with the royal family. The Queen Mother was walking on her own. I sat between her and Lillian with Slaw on my shoulder and ate more food than I had eaten in any single day of my life. Lucas asked me what I wanted most in the world. Freedom, I said. The table went quiet. I said I had not been outside in 3 years. I did not want revenge, and I did not want money. I just wanted to be free, to go where I chose, to not belong to someone who wanted me dead. The king looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, after the war. That night they gave me a guest room with a real bed, hot water, clean sheets. I lay down with Slaw beside me and fell asleep before I finished a thought. First time in 6 years, I slept without being afraid of what would happen in the morning. 3 days of healing. Most of the ward could walk again. Men who had been told they would miss the war were strapping on boots. On departure morning, the royal family came to see us off. The Queen Mother knelt and tied a magic bag to my waist with her own hands. A personal gift. She said it used my own mana to store things. I hugged her, and she held the back of my head for a moment and then let go. The king told me my healing had healed not just bodies, but hearts. Then he shook the hand of every departing soldier, 500 of them, one by one. Hector leaned over and said the king had always been good at that sort of thing. They called me to stand beside Lucas at the front of the column. I tried to hide behind taller soldiers. It did not work. The march began. I stored the army's food in my magic bag to prevent spoilage in the heat. When the soldiers realized what I was doing, they cheered. Hector explained. They had lost supplies to summer rot on every march for decades. A boy with a magic bag had just solved a problem that plagued the logistics corps for years. Over the days that followed, I fell into a pattern. Morning, heal sick horses. Midday, build sanitary facilities with earth magic. Afternoon, clean soldiers with life magic. Evening, heal anyone hurting. Slaw helped with everything. The sky was enormous. The air smelled like grass and dust, and something I could not name. I had been locked away from the world so long that the smell of open air felt like a discovery. Hector told me my father and brother were in the rear column, causing trouble, being kept far from us. I asked if I should apologize for them. He looked at me with an expression I would later learn meant he was choosing not to say something harsh about a parent in front of their child. He said no, their behavior was not my weight to carry. At one supply stop, a count named Robert told me he had known my mother. She did charity work in his territory. I filed it away. Another piece of her, another thread I was not letting go. The march continued toward the border. 500 soldiers. A war I was too young for. A version of myself I had not met yet. Slaw bounced on my shoulder. The dust stuck to my uniform and my legs ached by evening. It was the best I had ever felt. We stopped at Dash County first. The military base needed a resupply day, and Hector told me I was coming along to meet the local count. I did not argue. I had learned by then that saying no to Hector was the same as saying yes, but slower. Count Robert received us in a study that smelled like old books and lamp oil. When he heard my name, his whole posture changed. He stood from his chair, and for a moment, he just looked at me. Then, he told me he knew my mother. Not knew of her, knew her. He said Iris had done charity work in this territory years ago, healing townspeople at the local church without asking for payment or recognition. She had the same hair, he said. Same color, exactly. I did not know what to do with that. I just nodded and held it somewhere behind my ribs where the other pieces of her were collecting. The next morning, I stood in that same church with slaw on my shoulder, and the line of patients went out the door and down the steps. An elderly man with a shoulder frozen stiff for years, a girl whose fever had not broken in a week, a woman who had forgotten what walking without pain felt like. I started at the front and worked my way back, one at a time, steady, until slaw pressed against my neck and I understood. We were going to be here all day at this pace, so we cast wide area recovery together. The light spread blue and gold through the entire building, over every body in the pews, and every person in the church breathed easier at the same time. The nun at the door dropped her clipboard. The elderly man lifted his arm above his head for the first time in 8 years and made a sound I will not describe because it would sound like nothing if I tried. 10 soldiers guarded me that day. They had won the right in a tournament back at camp. I did not ask what kind of tournament. I heard later it was rock, paper, scissors, 50 rounds, dead serious. Men who had marched 300 miles to a war zone, competing with hand signs over who got to stand outside a church. The second stop was glorious viscountcy. Maya, the acting lord, was a young widow with 2 boys who discovered that slaw could bounce and immediately forgot all manners. Maya had known my mother from church volunteer work. She held me too long when we first met, long enough that I stopped breathing for a second, and her voice cracked when she pulled back. I let her. It seemed to help her more than it helped me, but that was fine. My mother kept becoming more real with every person who remembered her, and I was not going to turn that away. We healed at her church the same way. Wide area recovery at the end, the crowd so thick that 20 guards barely held the perimeter. Then we marched again. Days blurred on the road. Heal campsite travelers. March. Sleep in the command tent. Repeat. The mountains rose slowly on the horizon until they were not on the horizon anymore, but above us, blocking the sun by mid-afternoon. When we crossed into Garforce territory, the air changed. Colder, thinner. The smell of smoke drifted down from somewhere I could not see. Lucas said the Frontline base was a 2-hour ride from the border church. Hector said the treatment facility there had been overwhelmed for weeks. Nothing prepared me for that church. The nuns were running on nothing. Bandages reused until they were gray and stiff. Soldiers lying on bare stone because there were no more cots. The smell hit first, and I had been in medical wards before, but this was different. This was a place that had been losing the fight against injury for months, slowly, one body at a time, and it showed in the way the nuns moved, not rushed, resigned. Slaw pressed hard against my neck. I could feel the question in that pressure, and I answered it the way I always did. We charged everything we had and released it in a single wave, recovery magic and life magic together. Blue light ran along the floor like water. Yellow followed. Wounds sealed. Fever broke. The grime on their clothes, the stains on the walls, the old blood on the stone, all of it dissolved under the cleaning pulse until the building looked like it had been scrubbed and rebuilt from the inside out. The border count appeared behind me, Hardess, taller than the doorframe, built like a man who had been forged rather than born. He laughed when he saw the church, not mocking, relieved. He shook my hand with both of his and did not let go for a long time, and his grip said more than his words. I moved to the treatment facility next. More soldiers, worse injuries, missing limbs I could not yet restore. I treated what I could reach. Then I rode to the Frontline base, where over 100 freshly wounded soldiers waited in the dining hall, packed onto benches and leaning against walls. Slaw and I released another wave. Then we walked to the entrance where the soldiers with lighter wounds were sitting in rows on the packed earth. Another wave, the third one in half a day. The room tilted sideways. My knees went soft. I remember Lucas's hands catching me under the arms, Slaw pressing frantic against my chest, and then nothing at all. I woke on a sofa in the commander's room with a blanket draped over me, and Slaw curled warm against my stomach. 12 hours. Hector told me, without looking up from his paperwork. He was signing orders with his left hand, the one I grew back. The irony was not lost on either of us. Commander Gordon introduced himself that morning. Bald, thick mustache, shoulders like a shed door. He ran the forward base with a voice that carried through stone walls. My schedule from him was simple. Stand by in the day, treat wounded when battles happened, handle the serious cases after evening. 2 mages named Serena and Julia were assigned to watch me. I met them at breakfast. They were young, competent, surprised that I was a child. They got over it by lunchtime, which was faster than most. That afternoon, I taught them mana circulation, the technique I had learned from a dusty book at age 3. Neither of them had ever heard of it. Their previous instructor had told them to just keep casting until it worked, which Hector compared to teaching someone to swim by throwing them off a cliff. The days settled into a rhythm. Morning training with Serena and Julia, afternoon standby, evening healing. Slaw trained alongside me, her range of magic expanding every day in ways that made the soldiers stop and stare. 3 days into our routine, Lucas asked a question that changed everything. How far can you reach? I looked at the ridge on the horizon. It was deep in Imperial territory, far enough that a normal mage would not have bothered answering. I glanced at Slaw. She glanced at me. We both faced the ridge and fired. Holy bullet from me, aqua bullet from Slaw. The shots crossed the distance in less than a breath, and the mountainside exploded. Stones scattered like paper. Dust billowed into a column visible from every corner of the base. The silence behind me was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Hundreds of soldiers, perfectly still, perfectly quiet, staring at the plume of dust rising from a mountain that used to have a face. Hector put his hand on my shoulder, gently but firm. He told me, very calmly, that I was never to fire without express permission again. I nodded. My hands were shaking slightly. I had not expected it to hit that hard. For 3 days after that, the Imperial Army did not attack. Not a single arrow, not one probe. Reinforcements poured in from the kingdom's mountain bases. I used the silence, earth magic to flatten sloped ground, compress stone into walls, shape 2-story barracks with bunk beds and proper toilets. 4 buildings in a day. No one ordered me to do it. I saw soldiers sleeping in tents meant for half their number, and I knew I could fix it before sundown, so I did. Serena asked how I managed the mana cost. I told her that if you visualize the entire structure before casting, the magic fills the shape instead of searching for one. She wrote it down. I liked that about her. She wrote everything down. The war had run almost 6 months. Sporadic attacks, arrows, and long-range magic, all stopped by Serena and Julia's barriers. The pattern held, but the frustration grew. Lucas said it at dinner one night. This was not a war. This was attrition, and attrition served no one. Hector studied the Empire's movements and said something that shifted the room. The force we were fighting was not their full army. It was a rogue faction, glory seekers who had started the conflict without authorization and were now too deep to admit they had failed. Slav volunteered before anyone could ask. She would infiltrate the Imperial camp and confirm it. I opened my mouth, then closed it, because the look in her eyes, or whatever a slime has, that functions like eyes, was already decided. She returned in 1 hour, knocked on the door, which none of us knew she could do. Then, she picked up a pen in one tentacle and wrote a full intelligence report on the commander's table. Clear handwriting, organized paragraphs. The rogue faction had exhausted itself. Upper command had issued a withdrawal order the extremists were ignoring. In 2 days, they would launch one final all-out assault as a desperate last grab for recognition. Lucas read the report twice. Then he looked at Slaw, then back at the paper, then at me. I shrugged. She had been watching me read and write since we lived in a closet together. 3 years of that apparently counted for something. 2 days later, the drums started before breakfast. I positioned near the rear with Slaw. My job was the wounded, not the front. Wave after wave of Imperial soldiers crashed against our barriers, our crossbow volleys, Hector's defensive formations. Soldiers came back to me, bleeding from places their armor did not cover. I healed them, and they went back. Some came back again. Some did not come back at all. 3 died before I could reach them. I felt each one like a door closing in a room I was running through. The 4th man, a crossbowman whose chest wound was deep enough that I could see the shape of his ribs through the blood. I held his hand, while Slaw sealed the damage, and he coughed his way back from the edge. He did not thank me. He just gripped my fingers hard enough to hurt, and that was enough. By early afternoon, it was over. A decisive victory, they said. The Empire had nothing left. Lucas found me in the dining hall afterward. I was sitting on the floor because standing felt like something that happened to other people. He had that expression, the one where his mouth was almost smiling, but his eyes were carrying something heavier. He told me the Empire's weapon stockpile had been destroyed before the battle even started. Massive explosion. Landslide buried the remainder. The prisoners confirmed it. Location: the mountain directly behind their camp. Cause: a projectile impact from the kingdom's direction 3 days ago. I stared at him. He said the official report would credit a mysterious landslide. Then he almost smiled and said the commanders wished to thank that landslide personally. I looked at Slaw. Slaw looked at me. We had won the battle before it began, by accident. With a range test, nobody told us to stop. That night, the base buried the Imperial dead. Their belongings were set aside for return under ceasefire terms. Their graves were marked. I stood at the edge of the row and watched the dirt go over faces that had been alive this morning because glory seekers had pointed them at a wall they could never break. I was 7 years old. I did not feel 7. I felt like something with weight behind my eyes that had not been there when I left the capital. But the ceasefire was coming. I could feel it in the way Hector talked, the way Lucas planned. The war was ending, and maybe, when it did, I could stop counting the people I could not reach in time. The kitchen auntie had packed sandwiches sometime before we woke. I found mine wrapped in cloth on the table, still warm. Slaw sat on my shoulder, perfectly still. Neither of us had slept well. Hector spread a map flat and tapped the ridge where we had fired 3 days ago. The Empire was coming. Slaw had confirmed it twice now. Full armor, every man they had left, dawn assault. One final push from soldiers who knew their command had already abandoned them. Training exercise, Hector said. He looked at me. You and Slaw fire from the rear. Reduced power. Stun, not kill. Lucas confirmed the legal frame without blinking. The Empire had sent an ambush unit in the night. Our scouts caught them before dawn. That made everything that followed a counterattack. I did not argue. The sandwiches sat in my stomach like stones. Gordon gave his speech to the troops below. I could not hear the words from this distance, but I saw the effect. Shoulders squared, spines straightened, a ripple of resolve moving through them like wind through grass. Then the Empire came. They marched in open formation across the valley floor. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Their banners were torn. Their lines were uneven. These were not conquerors. These were men finishing something they no longer believed in. Slaw pressed against my neck. I lifted my hands. She extended beside me. We fired. Holy bullets from me, aqua bullets from Slaw. Not aimed at bodies, aimed at the ground in front of them, the dirt between their ranks, the spaces where no one stood. The impacts carved craters, threw men sideways, left the front rank stumbling and deaf from the concussion. The kingdom charged. It was over in hours. I watched from the ridge as the banners fell, as men dropped weapons and raised hands. Then I climbed down and walked into the field. The Imperial prisoners sat in rows on the ground, hands behind their heads. Some were burned. Some had shattered bones from the concussion waves. One man had blood running from both ears and could not hear me when I knelt beside him. I healed him first. No one told me to. No one stopped me either. The kingdom soldiers nearby watched without comment. A few of them had fought these same men an hour ago, but this was a child kneeling in the dirt with golden light spilling from his palms. And none of them were going to be the person who told that child to stop. I moved from man to man. Kingdom soldiers first where I found them, then every Imperial prisoner I could reach. Slaw took the left side. I took the right. We worked in silence. The injuries were not complicated. Broken bones, burns, shallow cuts from flying rock. The kind of damage that heals with time, even without magic. I just made the time shorter. One of the prisoners watched me heal his shoulder and said something in a language I did not understand. His tone was a question. Why? I did not answer because I did not have an answer he would believe. The men in front of me were hurt. That was the only calculation my hands knew how to make. By midday, I had treated over 40 prisoners. Only about 10 kingdom soldiers had been wounded, and none seriously. The strike had worked exactly as Hector designed it. I sat on a supply crate and stared at my hands. They were shaking, not from mana loss, from something I could not name, maybe the distance between what I had done on the ridge and what I was doing now. Both felt like me. Both felt necessary. I did not know how to hold them in the same body. Hector found me there. He did not say, "Well done." He said, "The ceasefire talks start in 5 days. Get some rest." Lucas spent those 5 days turning me into something presentable. How to sit when adults are negotiating. Where to put my hands. When to speak and when to be silent. How to bow to an imperial officer without bowing too deep. Slaw learned alongside me. She practiced sitting perfectly still on my shoulder without wobbling, which Lucas said was more important than any bow I could manage. The etiquette was exhausting, worse than combat. In a fight, I could move. In a negotiation, I had to sit in a chair and say nothing unless spoken to. And even then, the wrong word could cost more than the wrong spell. On the 5th morning, Lucas buttoned my collar straight, stepped back, and nodded once. Good enough. We walked to the Imperial camp. The crater from our practice shot was still there, a wound in the earth 50 paces across. I looked at it and looked away. Inside the reception room, Hector laid out the kingdom's terms. No territory, no reparations. Return all prisoners. Restore the pre-war borders. That was it. The Imperial officer across the table froze. He had been bracing for punishment. The leniency confused him worse than any demand would have. Then a young officer behind him snapped. He stood up, face flushed, and declared the Empire had not lost. His voice cracked on the word lost. He said his family had invested in this campaign. He said the attack was supposed to bring glory. His own colleagues dragged him from the room before he finished. The door closed. Silence. Hector waited. I did not mean to speak, but the Imperial officer was staring at the table with the expression of a man who believed he was still negotiating from strength, and the question came out of me the way questions come out of children, without strategy, without filter. If you won, I said, why are we the ones offering terms? The room went still. The officer looked at me, really looked, for the first time. A 7-year-old boy on a chair too big for him, asking the obvious thing no adult in the room had the nerve to say. Hector used the silence. He leaned forward, repeated the terms, and asked for an answer by afternoon. We left. Outside, Lucas put his hand on my head. He said nothing else. He did not need to. We returned after lunch with triple the guards. Hector's instinct. A different Imperial officer met us, wild-eyed, sweating. He pulled a knife on the kingdom guide at the door. The guide caught his wrist, twisted, and put him on the floor in one motion. Lord Lori, in disguise. She straightened her collar and said nothing. Then General Liebens arrived. He was an older man, gray-haired, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who had already decided what needed to happen before he walked through the door. He ordered the knife-wielding officer arrested. He ordered the 4 original negotiators removed, the same men who had sat across from us that morning, sweating through their collars. He brought in 3 new officers whose posture said military discipline rather than political ambition, bowed to Hector, and said 2 words. I apologize. Hector accepted. No more, no less. The real negotiations took less than an hour. Liebens was a moderate. He called this war a mistake from the start. 40 surviving kingdom prisoners would be returned, all seriously wounded. The ringleader who ordered the ambush on Hector months ago was among the captured officers. Hector noted it. He did not gloat. He simply added it to the record. Then Liebens hesitated. His face changed. He told us that more than half the kingdom prisoners held by the Empire had died in custody. Abuse by a rogue officer, the same man Lori had just put on the floor. Hector's expression did not change, but his hand closed into a fist under the table, and it stayed closed for the rest of the meeting. The covered wagons arrived the next morning. I heard Serena before I saw her, running, boots pounding the dirt, calling a name I did not recognize. Yulia was half a step behind, her hand pressed over her mouth. They carried the prisoners in on stretchers, 40 of them. That was what was left from a group that had been over 100, emaciated, hollow-eyed, ribs visible through their shirts, some missing limbs. One woman, pink-haired, young, a colleague of Serena and Yulia, had lost her right leg below the knee. She stared at the ceiling and did not react when Serena took her hand and whispered her name over and over. I did not wait for orders. Slaw and I released wide area recovery magic over every stretcher at once. The golden light spread like water. It was not enough for the worst cases, but it stabilized everyone. Then, individual work, the the hardest kind. I knelt beside the pink-haired woman and placed both hands on the stump of her leg. Limb regeneration cost more mana than anything else I could do. The bone grew first, then muscle, then skin. It took everything I had left in me. When I finished, Serena was crying. Yulia was crying. The woman was unconscious, but her leg was whole. I did 2 more regenerations that afternoon. An arm, a hand. Each one drained me deeper. By the 4th patient, I tried to stand and my knees folded. Slaw caught my collar before my face hit the table. "Sorry," I said, to no one in particular, to the people still waiting. "I need a minute." I did not get the minute. I was asleep before I finished the sentence. I woke in the commander's cot. Slaw was on the pillow beside me, glowing faintly. She had been cycling mana into me while I slept. The ceasefire was official. Gordon announced it at noon. All prisoner exchanges complete. All positions handed over. The earth magic barracks I had built stayed behind for the border garrison. Hector told me over breakfast that my father had been spreading rumors in the capital, that if Ken died at the front, the family would receive condolence money. He said it plainly, the way you report a weather change. I put down my bread. I thought about that for a long time. My father had sent me here to die. I already knew that. But hearing that he had put a price on it, that he was telling people he expected to collect, was different. It was the difference between someone pushing you off a cliff and someone selling tickets to watch you fall. I picked the bread back up, finished it, looked at Slaw. "We are going home," I said, wherever that was. Lucas came in afterward and explained the withdrawal. 2 groups, one with the former prisoners moving slowly, one with us, Lucas, Hector, and me, visiting the noble families who had helped during the march. We would reach the capital by New Year. He told me my brother had stayed in the rear the entire war, too weak for the front. He told me my mother's family, my grandmother, my aunt, were waiting to meet me at the audience. I nodded. I did not ask what would happen to my father. I already knew it would not be my problem to solve. Whatever the king decided, it would be enough. It would be just. I had seen how that man handled things. For the first time in 6 months, I thought about what I wanted, not what I needed to survive, not who needed healing, just what came next. Freedom, a home, people who chose to be near me. The war was over. I was 7 years old. I was tired in places sleep could not reach, but the road ahead was clear, and the carriage was waiting, and Slaw was already on my shoulder before I stood up. We left the front behind us. I did not look back. The capital appeared over the hill on a clear morning, and I did not recognize it. I had left this city in a wooden carriage with nothing but Slaw on my lap and a letter in my hands. I came back in an open carriage with Lucas on my left and Hector on my right, and a crowd lining the avenue so thick I could not see the cobblestones. They were shouting. Some of them were shouting my name. Slaw pressed against my shoulder. I waved because Lucas told me to wave, and I waved for over 30 minutes while the carriage crawled through streets I had never been allowed to walk. The Blue Healer, they called me. The son of the Blue Lady. I did not know what that second name meant yet. I would learn soon. By the time we reached the castle gates, my arm ached and my chest felt strange. Not bad, just full in a way I had not felt before. The throne room was silent, the way a drawn blade is silent. Rows of nobles stood on either side of the central aisle, their faces turned toward us as we walked in. I kept my eyes forward. Slaw sat perfectly still on my shoulder. The king waited on his throne. He was exactly as I remembered, broad, blonde, direct. He did not waste time on pleasantries. He welcomed Lucas and Hector home and commended them for their service. Then he looked at me. He spoke for perhaps 2 minutes. He named what I had done: recovery magic that saved hundreds of soldiers, earth magic that ended the decisive battle, a ceasefire achieved partly because I healed Imperial prisoners without being asked. He said these things to the room, not to me. The nobles needed to hear them. Then his voice shifted, formal, final. He declared me Baron Astor. The surname was new. It had never belonged to anyone before. He separated me legally from the Geen family in the same sentence. I was no longer their son. I was my own house. I had a name. I knelt on the marble and said thank you, and my voice did not shake, which surprised me. Then the king said another name, Louis Gian. A door opened at the far end of the hall. 2 royal guards brought my father in. He He was forced to his knees on the marble floor, 10 paces from the throne. I stood to the side. I did not move. The king did not shout. He read. The investigation had found everything. The letter, the same letter from that morning when I was 6. The one that ordered my disposal as military waste. The condolence money scheme. My father spreading rumors of my death so he could collect sympathy funds. And then the thing I had not known, the fraudulent birth registration. My brother was not my mother's son. He was the child of a maid. My father had forged the records to make him the legitimate heir while Iris was still alive. The room was absolutely still. The king pronounced sentence. Banned from all national and royal events for 20 years. A military tribunal to follow for his violations during the war. My father tried to speak, blustered something about his rights as a noble, but the guards were already pulling him toward the door. I watched his back until it disappeared. I did not say anything. There was nothing left to say to that man. Afterward, in a quiet room with the royal family, I bowed and apologized for my father's behavior. The king stopped me with a raised hand. He told me plainly that I carried nothing of that man except hair color that came from my mother. The queen mother, seated beside him in her lavender dress, nodded once. She looked stronger than the first time I had seen her, standing now, steady, her eyes bright. I had healed her chest months ago. She had spent those months arranging what came next. She explained my new life in efficient sentences. A count-level mansion, already furnished, already staffed. A schedule, the great church tomorrow to report the war's end and learn about my mother. Military treatment the day after. A night party. Study sessions at the castle for the junior civil service exam. I asked if it was really all right for someone like me to be a baron. She smiled. The kind of smile that does not tolerate the question being asked twice. Your mother would not have asked, she said. She would have started working. I decided not to ask again. The mansion was more house than I had ever stood inside. 3 stories, a garden with a pond, trees older than the kingdom's current war. The queen mother walked me through the iron gate and let me look. Then I saw who was standing at the front door, Hannah. She wore a proper head servant's uniform now. Dark dress, white apron, hair pinned back. She was crying before I reached her. She knelt and put her arms around me and said nothing for a long time. She had left the Gown estate the week my name started spreading through the capital. She did not wait to be asked. She did not wait for permission. She walked out on her own because she would not stay in a house that sent its child to die. You kept that closet clean for 3 years, she said, wiping her face with her sleeve. This is better. I laughed. It came out broken and strange, and I could not stop it. Frances arrived before the tea went cold. My grandmother, my mother's mother. She came through the door in a dark green dress with her back straight and her face controlled, and she looked at me for 3 full seconds before crossing the room. She held me without speaking. Her hands were shaking. I could feel it through my uniform. She had watched her daughter get forced into that marriage. She had not been able to stop it. Iris had died in that house, and Frances had not been allowed to visit. I was the thing that survived. I was standing here. She pulled back and held my face in both hands and studied it. Whatever she saw there made her close her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. You have her heart, she said. I can see it already. Tomorrow we will go to the church together. You should know where she rests. I nodded. I did not trust my voice to do more. The great church was the largest building I had ever entered. Stone pillars rose so high, the ceiling disappeared into shadow. Colored light poured through the stained glass in beams wide enough to stand in. Frances was already inside, praying in a forward pew. Beside her, a girl, young, maybe 16 or 17, with the same pale blue-silver hair that ran in my mother's family. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and her face changed the way weather changes, from calm to immediate joy. Cynthia, my mother's younger sister, my aunt. She took my hand before I could bow and pulled me close. I am your older sister, she announced. Not asked, announced. Starting now, starting today. Her voice was fast and warm and certain. I did not get a chance to argue. I did not want one. The Queen Mother arrived with the Queen shortly after. Cardinal Sion, a tall man with kind eyes, greeted us and spoke about my mother, how Iris had spent years here helping the sick, how the church still remembered her. Then his eyes flickered toward the side aisle. Several middle-aged nuns stood there. Their faces were white. He leaned close. Later, he said quietly. I will explain later. We began the morning prayers. A beam of colored light fell directly on me through the glass above. People murmured, I did not move. Slaw sat on my shoulder and reflected the light in tiny rainbows. Then the doors burst open. A young mother, running, clutching a crying baby against her chest. The baby's right arm hung at a wrong angle, broken from a fall. She was begging for help, looking for the priests. I did not think. I walked to her and put my hands over the baby's arm and healed it. The bone slid back into place. The crying stopped. The baby blinked up at me and grabbed my finger. I smiled at him. Behind me, the pale nuns had not moved. Their faces told a story I did not yet know, that they had spent years making my mother's work here difficult, and that what I had just done without thinking was exactly what Iris would have done. I did not know any of that yet. I just saw a baby in pain. Cardinal Sion explained it afterward in a private room. The nuns had been Iris's enemies for years, petty, jealous women who hindered her charity work because it made them look inadequate. They had tried to insert themselves into my welcoming party today to appear gracious. My healing of the baby made their posturing irrelevant. He said it with the calm satisfaction of a man who had been waiting a long time for exactly this. Cynthia added a memory, how Iris never hesitated, how she knelt beside anyone who hurt, no matter who they were or what the nuns said, how she was gentle in the way that strong things are gentle, not from weakness, but from having more than enough to give. I listened. I kept every word. I was building my mother out of other people's memories, one detail at a time. Then we went to the cemetery. Iris's grave was behind the church, under a bare tree that would probably bloom in spring. A modest stone, her name, her dates. Francis knelt and spoke to it, told Iris that her son had grown up, that he had her kind heart, that he was safe now. Her voice was steady, the way a river is steady, moving underneath the surface where you cannot see. I put my hand on the stone. It was cold. I stayed there. Slaw settled beside me and bowed in whatever way a slime bows. I did not know what my mother looked like. I had never seen a portrait. I was piecing her together from the words of people who loved her. A healer, a helper, a woman who knelt without hesitating. I could not miss someone I never knew, but I could stand here and be glad she existed. I could carry whatever she left me and try to be worth it. The stone was cold under my hand. The sky was gray and still. Somewhere behind me, Francis and Cynthia waited without rushing me. I was 7 years old. My name was Aster. I had a home, a family, a grandmother who held me without speaking, an aunt who called herself my sister on sight, and a hand on the grave of the woman I came from. The wound was not closed. It could not be, but it had a shape now, a boundary. I knew where I came from. I could stand on that. The kitchen staff cried when I walked in. Not the polite, controlled tears I had seen at the castle. These were the kind that come with arms around your neck and someone saying your name like a prayer. The woman who ran the facility kitchen grabbed me before I could bow and held on until I patted her back. I had been gone for months. To them, I was still the boy they had fed porridge to before the war. Slaw rode my shoulder the way he always did, and when I entered the treatment ward, the room went still. 20 cots, 14 occupied. The soldiers who were awake looked at me and then at each other, as if confirming what they saw. I did not explain myself. I went to the nearest man, asked where it hurt, and started. By midday, I had cleared every patient who could be cleared. My mana capacity had grown during the war. What used to take me 3 passes now took 1. Slaw handled the lighter cases alone, while I focused on the deeper injuries. A man with a crushed finger watched it straighten and grow back in silence, then flexed it like it had never been gone. Hector found me in the reception room after lunch. He sat across from me, set a folder on the table, and opened it without ceremony. The court-martial results. My father had been demoted and transferred to a rear supply unit. His associate had been forced to repeat a full year of recruit training from the beginning. The condolence money scheme, the one where my death would have paid out to my father's accounts, had been traced and frozen. They are under surveillance, Hector said. He closed the folder. Not enough to lock them away yet, but enough that they cannot move without being seen. I nodded. That was enough for now. The man who sold me to the war was now counting supply crates in a warehouse somewhere, watched by soldiers who reported everything he did. It was not dramatic. It was not even satisfying in the way I expected justice to feel. It was just correct. The world had noticed what he was, and the world had responded. "You are doing well," Hector said. He stood. "Keep studying. The exam is in 2 months." The weeks after that took shape. Hector arranged a schedule, and I followed it. military magic training once a week at the soldiers' training ground, house calls to noble families once a week to treat minor ailments, church healing sessions with Cynthia on occasion, and every remaining hour studying. The junior bureaucrat exam textbooks arrived in a stack taller than slaw. I read them the way I had read every book in my father's unused study back in the closet, from first page to last, then again, then a third time until the words lived in me without effort. 3 years of secret studying had made me fast. I did not have a social life to pull me away. I had a desk, a slime on my shoulder, and silence. The house calls were strange. Nobles who would never have acknowledged a Gion's son now invited Baron Astor into their parlors. I treated gout, headaches, old training injuries that had stiffened over decades. Most of them were polite. A few watched me too carefully, trying to measure what I was worth to them. I healed them anyway. That was the job. Hannah brought tea at intervals and told me to rest. I did not rest, but I drank the tea. The garden pond had grown crowded. The smaller slimes multiplied there, practicing magic on the fish and on each other. Some mornings, I watched them from the study window and thought about how different silence felt when you chose it. In the closet, it had been a cage. Here, it was just quiet. The exam was at the royal castle. I arrived early, reviewed my textbooks alone, and waited. The other examinees filtered in, most of them adults twice my height. A noble youth in expensive clothes entered last, made a remark about who let a child into the examination hall, and was scolded by the supervisor before he sat down. When the written portion began, I worked through it methodically. I finished in half the allocated time. I reviewed every answer twice, then sat with my hands flat on the desk and waited for the bell. The noble youth was still writing frantically when time was called. A week later, at the result board outside the castle's main gate, I found my number immediately. I had passed. The noble youth could not find his number. He protested. He demanded explanations. He accused the examiners of corruption. Lucas appeared behind him with soldiers and said one sentence. The youth left. The Queen Mother was waiting upstairs. She pulled me into lunch and announced I would take the senior examination the following year. Hector was there too, nodding like this had always been the plan. At the mansion that evening, the slimes were sulking because they had not been allowed to eat lunch with me at the castle. I apologized. I was 8 years old and negotiating peace terms with slimes. The consolation party filled the great hall of the castle, a room so large it doubled as a ballroom. Cynthia found me first. Then the Queen Mother, the Queen, and the women who had guarded me during the war appeared like a formation closing ranks. Hector led me to the front where my grandparents were waiting. The king spoke. He thanked the soldiers who had fought. He announced Lucas's engagement to Celia. Then he called me forward. I walked to the front alone with Slaw on my shoulder. The king said my name and listed what I had done. The room was silent. I did not know what to do with that silence, so I bowed and stepped to his side when he gestured. Nobles came forward to greet the king. Most were polite. My grandparents came. Frances, in her dark green dress, standing straight despite the tremor in her hands. She greeted the king with dignity. A drunk noble in the crowd muttered loud enough for the room to hear. He said something about commoner descended families having no business approaching the throne. I stepped forward before I thought about it. "Those are my grandparents," I said. "They have every right to be here." The room went quiet again. The king looked at the noble and said nothing for a long moment. Then he spoke. One calm sentence about respect. The noble backed down. Frances found me afterward. Her hand was shaking when she touched my sleeve. She thanked me for calling them my grandparents in front of everyone, and her voice was not steady. I did not understand why that was remarkable. They were my family. Of course, I said it. Later that evening, soldiers from the border front found me and shook my hand. A woman I had healed during the march told me her shoulder had never ached since. A man whose leg I had mended at the base showed me that he could dance now, and proved it badly, until his friends pulled him away, laughing. These were the people I understood, not the nobles in silk, calculating my value across the room. The soldiers, the ones who remembered what I did because they lived with the result of it every day. The volunteer event at the Grand Church was the largest I had attended. The royal family sponsored it, food distribution, free healing, and something I had asked about during the planning, opinion collection. I had suggested that we ask the townspeople what they actually needed, not just give them what we assumed they wanted. The queen blinked when I said it. Then she smiled and told Cardinal Sion to arrange it immediately. I apologized for creating extra work. Celia told me to stop apologizing. Cynthia worked beside me at the healing stations. Sla handled the lighter cases. The elderly came in numbers: bad backs, joint pain, the slow deterioration of age. Some of them looked at my hair and said I looked like someone they used to know. I did not ask who. I already knew. Noble faction ladies arrived late in lavish dresses despite being told to dress modestly. They refused to help. They stood in the corner and watched. The Queen Mother walked to them, said something I could not hear, and they left within minutes. The Queen followed up with a look that could have frozen glass. We continued without them. Then, the boy came in on a stretcher, a robbery at the bakery down the street. The shopkeeper's son, maybe 9 or 10 years old, brought in by soldiers, wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, his left hand gone, cut clean. The stumps of his fingers were not there anymore. His face was gray. Cynthia's hand went to her mouth. The women around me froze. I did not freeze. I walked to the stretcher. Sla was already glowing on my shoulder, charging without being told. I placed both hands over the boy's chest and pushed everything I had into the light. The healing was not quiet. It was not the gentle glow of a back pain treatment. It filled the church. Blue-white light flooded from my palms and covered the boy like a tide. And where his left hand ended in nothing, something began. Bone first, then muscle, then skin, growing outward like a plant finding sunlight. Fingers, fingernails, a whole hand, new and clean and perfect, attached to a wrist that had been a ruin 30 seconds ago. The boy's color came back. His breathing steadied. I cleaned him with life magic. The blood dissolved off his skin and clothes. When I pulled my hands away, he was whole. He was sleeping. His father was brought in next, bleeding from the shoulder. I healed him too. He grabbed my hand when he woke and could not let go. He kept saying thank you. He kept looking at his son's hand as if it might vanish. Cardinal Sion put his hand on my shoulder afterward. He said that rushing to a stranger's side without a second thought, that was exactly what my mother used to do. I did not know what to say to that, so I bowed and I went back to the healing station and I finished my shift. The Queen Mother told me later, in the quiet of the reception room, that the noble faction had gone silent, that the people outside were already calling me the Blue Healer, that the hand I had grown back in front of 200 witnesses was the kind of story that could not be undone by politics. I nodded. I was tired. I was 8 years old, and my hands still tingled from the light. The Queen Mother had poured me a second cup of tea when Lucas walked in without knocking. That alone told me something was wrong. He never skipped the courtesy unless it was urgent. A staircase railing had collapsed at Baron Diner's mansion. Several servants injured. The Baron's daughter pinned under debris with a fractured leg. I set the cup down. Sla was already on my shoulder before I stood. The carriage ride took 12 minutes. I spent them running through what I knew about compound fractures in children, alignment, swelling window, nerve proximity. Sla hummed faintly against my neck, already building charge. The girl was in bed when I reached her room, 9 years old, maybe 8. Brown hair stuck to her forehead with sweat, jaw locked, hands fisting the sheets. She had not cried. I could tell because her parents were more shattered than she was. Her mother clutching the doorframe, her father pacing behind. I knelt beside the bed. Where does it hurt the most? Her eyes opened. She stared at me the way most people did. Confusion first, then something sharper. But instead of awe, what I got was irritation. Everywhere, she said, obviously. I almost smiled. I placed both hands above her shin and let the light come. The fracture was clean but displaced. Sla moved to her knee and worked downward while I held the alignment point. The green glow filled the room for nearly a minute. When it faded, the girl's jaw had unclenched and her breathing slowed. She was asleep before I finished. Her mother dropped to her knees and thanked me until I had to ask her to stop. Her father bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the carpet. I treated the 3 servants next. Sprains, a cracked rib, bruised kidneys, then inspected the railing. Age, deterioration, no sabotage. I told Lucas we should warn other noble families to check theirs. On the ride home, I realized I had not asked the girl's name. A few days later, the Queen passed along a request. The girl's leg still ached. Residual pain from insufficient stamina during the first session. I went back. Chris was sitting up this time, dressed in a plain house gown, her leg stretched out with a pillow under it. The moment I walked in, she narrowed her eyes. "You are the same age as me," Probably, I said. They said the blue healer was coming. She looked me up and down. I thought you would be taller. I knelt and placed my hands over her shin again. Hold still. She did not hold still. She leaned forward and watched the light with genuine curiosity, asking questions the entire time. What was the mana doing? Could she feel it if she tried? Was it always green? Did it hurt me to use it? I answered every question without stopping the treatment. When the light faded and I told her to stand, she swung both legs off the bed and hopped to her feet like the fracture had never happened. Her mother rushed in to scold her. Chris ignored this completely. You can use fire magic? She asked, because apparently someone had told her about my other affinities. Yes, her face changed. Something lit behind her eyes. Competitive, alive. I can too, and I can put mana into my sword. I could feel it now that she mentioned it. Her mana signature was strong, well-channeled, physically trained. She had been swinging a blade long enough that her body already knew how to move with power behind it. You are better at swords than me, I said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation. She grinned, wide, sharp, startled. Nobody had said that to her before. Not like that. Not as a fact rather than flattery. A week later, I walked onto the training ground and found Chris already there. Red knight-style uniform, hair pulled into a ponytail, wooden practice sword resting on her shoulder. Lucas had arranged it. She would teach me swordsmanship. I would teach her mana circulation. The exchange was not even close to fair in my favor. Chris already understood how to move with her body. When I held her hand and walked her through the mana circulation pattern, she grasped it in minutes. Not hours, not days, minutes. The court mages watching from the sideline went quiet. I was not surprised. Anyone who has trained their body to coordinate under pressure already has half the foundation for magical control. Then she picked up her practice sword and invited me to spar. She beat me in 4 exchanges. Not close. Not a lucky hit. She read my stance, slipped my guard, and put the wooden blade against my ribs with a precision that told me she had been doing this since she could walk. Again, I said. She beat me in 3. Hector appeared at the edge of the yard, arms crossed. He watched the second round without speaking. When Chris stepped back and lowered her blade, he nodded once. At her, not at me. Good footwork, he said. Her spine straightened. She had not expected that. We trained twice a week after that. Swords at her father's mansion, mana at the military ground. Horse riding started the following week. Selle was better at riding than both of us, which Chris found personally offensive and I found privately hilarious. Months passed. Training, studying, house calls, church healing, horse riding. The routine had a shape I recognized from my previous life. A schedule so full, there was no room for the old silence to creep back in. I did not mind. On examination day, I sat in the royal castle hall with 11 other candidates and opened the senior bureaucrat test. It was harder than the junior. Dense legal reasoning, policy analysis, historical precedent questions that required connecting events across 3 centuries. I finished in just over half the allotted time. The interview afterward was longer than the written portion. 3 ministers asked questions designed to reveal whether you could think under pressure. I had spent 2 years being questioned by kings and generals. These men were polite by comparison. 1 week later, the results were posted at the castle gate. My number was there. I had passed. The queen told me afterward that I had broken Arthur's record. He passed at 12. I was 9. The celebration happened at my mansion that afternoon. The queen mother, the queen, Mary, Celia, Cynthia, Francis, and Chris were already waiting when I arrived. Hannah had prepared food for twice the number of people who were actually present, which meant there was exactly the right amount, because Hannah always overestimated by the correct margin. Chris punched my shoulder. Show off. You could take it next year. Maybe I will. She said it like a threat and a promise at the same time. Arthur and Mary's wedding was 3 days away when I arrived early at the great cathedral for a security walkthrough. Slaw rode my shoulder. The nuns were already there, and one of them was kneeling beside a stain on the ceremonial red carpet, scrubbing uselessly with a wet cloth. It won't come out, she told me, voice thin with distress. It's been here since the autumn service. I looked at the stain, looked at the carpet stretching the full length of the nave, looked at my hands. Life magic was good at removing organic matter from surfaces. I had used it to clean wounds, sterilize bandages, purify water. A carpet stain was just organic matter on a surface. I knelt, pressed both palms flat, and pushed. The green light rippled outward from my hands like water across glass. It hit the stain and dissolved it instantly. Then it kept going. along the carpet, up the stone columns, across the stained glass frames, over the ceiling beams. The dust of decades lifted in a silent wave and vanished. The brass fixtures gleamed. The marble floor reflected candlelight like a mirror. I pulled my hands back. The entire cathedral was spotless. The nuns stared. I stared. Slaw made a sound that might have been a laugh. I only meant to clean the stain, I said to no one in particular. Cardinal Sion arrived 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway, looked slowly from floor to ceiling, then turned to the nearest nun. "Tell anyone who asks," he said calmly, "that the young baron performed a blessing for the wedding, a family tradition. His mother did the same for the king's ceremony. The rumor went through military channels before noon. By evening, I heard from Hector that the troublesome noble faction members had decided this was not the wedding to cause problems at. Apparently, the prospect of angering someone who could reshape a cathedral with his palms made scheming feel less appealing. My grandfather arrived later and simply squeezed my shoulder. He did not say he was proud. His grip said it for him. The wedding itself was everything a royal ceremony should be. Arthur entered in formal white and gold, leaf tucked in his chest pocket. Mary came down the aisle in a gown that caught the colored light from every window I had accidentally polished 3 days before. Slaw sat on the altar, security duty, technically, though to anyone watching it looked like a sacred ornament. Cardinal Sion officiated. The vows were clear, the rings exchanged without fumbling, and when Arthur lifted the veil and kissed his bride, the applause filled every corner of the cathedral. I sat beside my grandfather and watched something I had never seen before. Two people choosing each other in front of everyone who mattered to them. The concept was not foreign, but seeing it performed with that kind of certainty, that calm joy, I filed it somewhere I could not name. Some nobles in the far pews wore sour expressions. Guards monitored them. Nothing happened. The parade began an hour after the ceremony. Nobles filed out of the cathedral in order of rank. The cavalry guard assembled at the departure point. Horses groomed, riders in formation. Then my father fell off his horse. I did not see it happen. I heard the commotion, a thud, shouting, officers running. By the time I turned, he was being hauled upright by 2 soldiers, red-faced and unsteady, drunk, at a royal wedding parade, on duty. The king did not hesitate. He turned, found me in the crowd, and spoke one sentence. "Ken, take his position." I did not hesitate either. The horse was brought to me. I mounted cleanly. 6 months of training made the motion automatic. The cavalry captain repositioned me beside him at the front. I adjusted my grip, settled my weight, and nodded. The crowd did not know what had happened behind the lines. All they saw was a boy with sapphire hair in a dark uniform riding at the head of the wedding cavalry. They cheered. They threw petals. They called the name I had earned. 1 hour, through every street, past every district, under every banner. I kept my back straight and my eyes forward and did not think about the man who had fallen. After the parade, the captain clapped my shoulder and called me a natural. Hector found me at the reception and conveyed 2 things: the king's approval and a quiet note about what the public had just witnessed. The father who sent his son to die had been replaced by that son in the most visible moment of the year. Everyone who needed to understand that message had understood it. The year wound down the way a river slows before it widens. More training, more studying, more house calls. The New Year's audience brought one piece of real justice: 3 corrupt noble families arrested in the throne room, exposed by evidence the slimes had gathered during our volunteer work in the slums. Tax exploitation, money laundering, funds redirected from refugees into private coffers. The king announced it in front of everyone who mattered. The message was clear. At the year-end charity event, Chris and I worked side by side treating townspeople in the great church. We had developed a rhythm by then. I handled the severe cases. She assisted with the lighter ones. Slaw moved between us, filling gaps. The soldiers counting patients said we treated more in one afternoon than the previous year's full-day effort. Many of our patients were refugees, people from territories bled dry by the same noble lords now sitting in cells. An old woman with swollen joints, a child with a fever that had gone untreated for weeks, a man whose back had been broken by overwork and never set properly. The Queen Mother stood beside me after the last patient left. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with her body. "The king is already acting," she said quietly. Arthur and Lucas too. This will not continue. I thought about my father, my brother, the patterns they had followed, the people they had treated as resources rather than lives. Good, I said. Chris found me afterward, wiping her hands on a cloth. Slaw dozed on her shoulder, something that had started happening without either of us discussing it. She sat down next to me on the church bench and said nothing for a while. Next year, she finally said, I want to do more. The slimes in the garden pond that evening were teaching each other new magic. Small bursts of light, little water shapes, wind spirals. I watched them from the study window while Hannah brought tea and scolded me for staying up past midnight. I was 9 years old. I had a friend who argued with me, a family that chose me, and hands that could fix what was broken. The year ended, and for the first time in either of my lives, I did not dread what came next. Chris's sword cracked against mine hard enough to jar my wrist. She stepped back, grinning, ponytail swinging. You looked amazing at the parade, you know. I lowered my practice sword and rubbed the sore spot in my palm. The wedding parade had been weeks ago. People were still talking about it. Not because of me, I thought, but because my father had fallen off his horse drunk in front of the entire capital. The king had pointed at me and told me to take his place. I rode for an hour with the cavalry captain and did not make a single mistake. The townspeople keep bringing it up, Chris said. She sheathed her sword and stretched her arms overhead. They say your father could not even sit a horse, and his 10-year-old son rode better than half the cavalry. I did not answer that. There was nothing useful to say about my father anymore. Each season brought a new humiliation, and each one mattered less than the last. Slaw bounced on the fence post beside the yard, watching us. The baby slimes were somewhere in the garden, learning wind magic from each other. I had turned 10 that winter. My clothes were shorter in the sleeves. Hannah had already ordered new ones. 1 week later, Hector summoned me to the castle. A new prototype sat on the table between us. A model of a 3-person magic ship, small enough to hold in both hands. Flew from Kamos in half a day, he said, tapping the hull with one finger. Single magic soldier can power it. We loaded backup stones just in case. I asked about mana charging protocols. He answered. Lucas arrived and explained the safety features. I was thinking about troop transport times when the floor shook. It was brief, a tremor, not a quake. But the communication device on the table lit up immediately. Hector listened, and his expression changed. Kamos territory, he said. Half the buildings down, landslides on 3 sides, dozens trapped. I was already standing. I can go. The ship is right here. Hector looked at me, then at Lucas, then at the king, who had entered without announcement and was reading the same report. The king's voice was flat. Baron Astor, you have special operation authority. Go. We arrived before dark. From the air, Kamos looked like someone had stepped on it. Roads cracked into jagged lines. Roofs caved inward. Dust still hung in the air, thick enough to taste. The ship landed at the gate. I jumped down with Slaw on my shoulder and ran to the magistrate. A red-haired man named Anaza met us. He recognized me the moment I said my name. Blue healer, he breathed. I did not waste time. I took a position in the town square, closed my eyes, and started building the spell. It was wider than anything I had attempted before. Not a single patient, not a ward, the entire settlement. Every magic circle I could layer, weakened individually, but stacked together into a blanket of recovery that would cover every injured person within the walls. The town glowed blue. I held it for as long as my body allowed. People were crying in the streets. Some of them could suddenly stand who could not before. Some of them stopped bleeding. It was not perfect. It was not a cure, but it was enough to keep the dying alive until I could reach them one by one. Then my knees gave out, and everything went dark. I woke on a sofa. Slaw was bouncing on the table beside me, already recovered. The baby slimes were lined up beside him like a row of colored lanterns. I ate the sandwiches Hannah's staff had packed, drank water, and went back outside. The next 2 days blurred together, rubble clearing with telekinesis, pulling survivors from collapsed houses, building temporary shelters out of shaped earth. The same approach I had used at the border years ago, family units and single units, ramparts for defense. The slimes split duties, healing at the church, food distribution, water purification. I treated the injured until my mana emptied again, collapsed again, was carried back to the sofa again. Gordon told me the king was worried. I said I understood. Then I went back to work. By the end of the second week, every survivor had been found. Every road within 5 kilometers was repaired. The temporary housing was full and functional. When the magic ship lifted us back toward the capital, the townspeople gathered at the gate to see us off. Some of them were crying again, but differently this time. 1 week after I returned, Chris and I were finishing morning drills. She had just disarmed me cleanly. My footwork was still worse than hers and probably always would be, when a voice cut across the yard. I knew that voice. I had not heard it in months, but my body remembered it from years before that. The sound of it arriving unannounced in a place where I was supposed to be safe. Grant. He was crossing the yard in a cadet uniform, face flushed, wooden sword already in his hand. The soldiers near the fence went still. Chris stepped closer to me without thinking about it. He screamed something about how I had destroyed the family, how our father was being punished because of me, how I should die and apologize. Then he charged. I did not call for help. I pulled my practice sword from my bag, released physical enhancement magic into my arms and legs, and met his swing. The deflection was clean. His weapon spun out of his hands and landed 10 paces away. Before he could lunge after it, I cast restraint magic, a binding that wrapped his limbs without causing harm, and held him pinned to the ground. He thrashed. He cursed. He screamed my name like it was something he could break just by saying it loud enough. Soldiers were already running. Someone had gone for Hector. I stood over my brother and said nothing. There was nothing to say to him that would make any difference. Hector arrived in under a minute. He looked at Grant on the ground, looked at me, and gave a single order. Guards seized Grant under the arms and dragged him toward the gate. He was still screaming when they turned the corner. "I am sorry," I said to everyone watching, "for the disruption." Chris touched my arm. I did not know what to do with that. The formal audience came 1 week later. Gordon and I stood before the throne with the slimes lined up behind us, even the babies, who bounced in place with what I could only describe as nervous excitement. The king spoke. He commended the Kima's relief operation. He praised Gordon's command and my healing. He said the people of Kimas had sent letters, dozens of them, describing what we had done. Then he appointed Gordon as Baron of Law. The court applauded. Then he appointed me as a court mage. I did not react. I stood still and let the words settle. Court mage. I was 10 years old. I did not know what to do with the title except keep doing what I had already been doing. A large man stepped forward from the noble section. I recognized him, the same lord who had cornered me about marriage proposals at the New Year party. He pointed at me and declared that I had caused the earthquake. The silence in the room was immediate and total. The king did not raise his voice. He simply stated the facts. Every person at the magic ship demonstration had been together at the time of the earthquake. The timeline was documented. I had been called to Camus after the event, not before. The accusation did not survive contact with the record. The noble's face went white. Royal knights took him by both arms and walked him out of the hall. The doors closed behind him. The king looked at me. "Congratulations, Court Mage Aster." Afterward, the Queen Mother and the Queen took me to the dressing room. Mary and Celia followed. They had fabric swatches, measurement tapes, and opinions about sleeve length that apparently required the entire afternoon to resolve. I stood on a small platform in the center of the room and thought about the people in Camus, while 4 women discussed whether my cuffs should be embroidered with silver thread or white gold thread. The Queen Mother held up 2 nearly identical blues against my shoulder and asked which I preferred. I told her they looked the same to me. She laughed and chose the darker one. "Your mother would have loved this," she said quietly, adjusting the collar against my neck. "She always said you would grow into something the world could not ignore." I did not know what to say to that either, so I stood still and let them measure. Autumn came. Lucas married Celia in the great cathedral. The ceremony was everything Arthur and Mary's had been: grand, precise, and watched by the entire court. But this time, no noble lords tried to crash the entrance. 4 had attempted it at Arthur's wedding. The queen had handled them personally, confronted them at the doors, and ordered their arrest before they crossed the threshold. That reputation preceded her now. No one tested it twice. Slaw scattered flower petals with wind magic during the procession. The baby slimes helped, sending tiny bursts of colored light into the air like living confetti. Chris sat beside me in the second row, wearing a formal dress she clearly hated, and whispered commentary about every noble who walked past. Lucas looked calm. Celia looked radiant. The king watched his son marry with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between pride and release. After the ceremony, I congratulated Lucas in the reception hall. He gripped my shoulder and said, "You will be next, eventually." I told him I was 10. He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh without any weight behind it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Hector called me to a briefing. Intelligence reports. The Empire was gathering provisions along the Garforce border, troop movements consistent with a buildup. Not confirmed hostile yet, but the pattern was familiar. Senior bureaucrat training rotation, the king said. You are assigned to the border territory. Learn the administrative systems. Observe the garrison operations. I understood what he was not saying. The training was real, but so was the positioning. If the Empire moved, I would already be there. Your father is stationed in a rear unit at Garforce, Hector added, watching my face. Low-risk posting. He was supposed to redeem himself. I nodded. I did not ask how that was going. I already knew. The magic ship was loaded within 2 days. I packed study books, healing supplies, and a change of clothes. Hannah fussed over the bags. Chris came to the military facility to see me off and told me not to collapse this time. I will try, I said. She punched my arm lightly. Slaw bounced on my shoulder. The ship lifted, turned south toward the border, and I watched the capital shrink behind us. I was 10 years old, a court mage, and heading back to the front where my father, the man who had sent me to die 4 years ago, was waiting in a rear tent, likely drunk, certainly scheming, and about to make the last mistake of his military career. The ship banked south over farmland that thinned into scrub as we approached the border. Hector sat across from me, reviewing field dispatches, his jaw set in the way it got when something was worse than the briefing implied. The senior bureaucrats were grouped at the far end of the cabin, 5 commoners who had passed every exam the kingdom could throw at them, and not one had seen a military border up close. Slaw rode my shoulder, still as glass. I could feel the faint pulse of search magic humming in the slime's body. Already scanning, already checking. 4 years of training had made that instinct automatic. Hector looked up from the dispatch. The Empire had tripled its provision stores in the last month, 3 times the size of the last war's buildup. The reinforcement schedule was already in motion. Units from 2 other bases converging on the border. If combat starts, Hector said, the bureaucrats evacuate by carriage. You heal. He let that settle. Then, quieter. Your father's unit is in a rear support posting, foot military base. They caused trouble at the main base and were reassigned. I nodded. I already knew. I had known since before we left. I did not intend to look for him. Hades met us in the courtyard himself, a tall man with weathered hands and a smile that had more lines in it than the last time I had seen him. He shook hands with Hector first, then turned to me and gripped my hand with both of his. Court mage now, he said. His eyes moved to the badge on my chest. Your mother would not have believed it. I barely believe it. He let go and clapped my shoulder once, hard enough that Slaw bounced. The estate was busier than I remembered. Soldiers moved between buildings in formation. Supply wagons lined the inner wall. Whatever the Empire was doing on the other side of that border, everyone here was treating it as real. After lunch, Warner, Hades' son, began the first of our practical sessions. Border governance, trade disputes, drought response. The bureaucrats took notes like their careers depended on it, which they did. I listened and filed the information somewhere behind the part of my mind that kept checking the direction of the Imperial camp. The next morning, we rode out to the Frontline base. It was bigger than I remembered. The wall had been reinforced since the First War. The watchtowers doubled. Commander Zigaruto met us at the gate, the same square-jawed officer who had commanded the line 4 years ago. Soldiers I recognized from that first deployment spotted me in the group and raised their hands. One of them grinned and pointed at my badge. I raised a hand back and felt the weight of what that gesture meant. The last time they had seen me, I was 7 and healing their wounds in a field tent. Zigaruto explained the situation over lunch. The Empire and the Kingdom had no formal peace treaty. Trade still flowed through the border town, but the military posture on both sides had never fully relaxed. The current buildup was unusual, too fast, too concentrated in one sector. I borrowed a pair of binoculars from the observation wall and looked across. The Imperial camp had swelled. Tents stretched back farther than they had during the last war. I counted cook fires and stopped at 40. Hector stood beside me, arms crossed. He did not need to say what we were both thinking. I extended my wide area search magic across the terrain between the wall and their camp. Hundreds of signatures, moving but holding position. Not yet, but soon. We moved to the cafeteria for a late meal. The auntie behind the counter recognized me before I was through the door. She set down a plate of stew without asking and told me I was still too thin. I was halfway through the bread when the explosions hit. 3 detonations in sequence. The building shook. Dust fell from the ceiling beams. Then the siren, a single long wail that turned every soldier in the room into a different person. Bowls dropped, chairs scraped. The bureaucrats went white. A runner burst through the door, breathing hard. Long-range magic barrage from the Empire. All incoming spells intercepted. All of them. The slimes caught everyone. The cafeteria went silent. Sla was already on the floor, body pulsing with a blue-green light I had seen 100 times in training, but never at this scale. The chibi slimes, posted along the outer wall since dawn, had expanded into a distributed net and stopped every single projectile before it reached the stone. 4 years. 4 years of practice, identifying magical signatures, of intercepting my training spells, of learning what Imperial attack magic felt like from the captured samples Hector had arranged. This was what it had been for. I ran outside with Hector. My search magic was already wide. I could feel the signatures moving, a large force advancing from the south, a second unit looping through the tree line to the east, trying to flank. South and east, I told Hector. Main force is 500 meters and closing. Flanking unit in the trees. He nodded once. Do it. I raised my hands. Holy bullets first. Over 50 of them, arcing high and falling in a wide spread across the advancing line. Non-lethal, designed to stun, to drop men where they stood without killing them. I watched the first rank crumble. Then, thunderbullets. Over 100 reduced power, fired in 3 waves. The paralysis effect spread through the formation like a current through water. Soldiers dropped mid-stride. Some inside the Imperial camp itself went down. The range was wider than I had planned, but Hector said nothing about that. Ziguruto ordered the charge. Kingdom soldiers poured over the wall and into the paralyzed lines. Sla and the chibi slimes handled the flanking unit. I felt the reports coming back through Sla's awareness. Captured, no kingdom casualties. The treeline unit had been bound with restraint magic and left sitting in a row. The whole thing lasted under an hour. When the dust cleared, hundreds of Imperial soldiers lay on the ground unable to move. Their commander, a man in decorated armor who had apparently decided to launch this attack without his own empire's approval, was paralyzed face down in the dirt. I walked down from the wall and started healing. Kingdom soldiers first, then the Imperial wounded. A man is a man. A wound is a wound. I never learned how to tell the difference by uniform color. The next morning, I was called to the front base building. 5 men sat tied with ropes at the entrance, fat, trembling, still in their traveling clothes, not their uniforms. Louis was in the middle. He had packed a bag. He had actually packed a bag and tried to leave before dawn. Hector stood over them with his arms folded. The base soldiers had caught all 5 within the hour. They had not even made it past the perimeter. The 4 other luxury faction heads stared at the ground. One of them was crying. Louis was not crying. Louis was looking directly at me. He started talking the moment I was close enough to hear. It was my fault. All of it. If I had just done what the letter said, if I had just died on the front line like I was supposed to, none of this would have happened to him. He demanded I apologize. He demanded I fix what I had broken. Hector said one word. I did not catch what it was, but Louis stopped talking. Then Hector announced it. Royal decree. All 5, noble rights suspended immediately. Transport to the capital via magic ship for military court proceedings. Charges: desertion in a combat zone, dereliction of duty during an active engagement. The other 4 started babbling at once. Louis just stared. Before they were escorted to the ship, I walked forward on my own. Hector did not stop me. He stepped aside and waited by the door. I stood in front of Louis, close enough to see the broken veins across his nose, the stain on his collar, the way his hands shook against the ropes. He was 40 years old and he looked 60. He smelled like sweat and old alcohol. I spoke quietly, not for the audience. There were soldiers watching, and Hector and the bureaucrats behind me. I spoke quietly because that was the only volume this deserved. You started this the morning you put me in that carriage. My voice did not shake. I had expected it to. It did not. I was 6. I had a letter in my hands and a slime on my shoulder, and you were smiling because you thought you would never have to look at me again. He opened his mouth. I kept going. I did not die. I healed people. I worked. I earned my name. Everything I have, I built. You had nothing to do with it, and I have nothing left to say to you. I turned. I walked back to the base. I did not wait for his response. Behind me, I heard him start shouting something. The words did not reach me. They did not need to. Hector fell into step beside me as I passed the doorway. He said nothing. He put his hand on my shoulder for 3 steps, then let go. I went back to the infirmary. There were still soldiers waiting. We returned to the Garforce estate that afternoon. Hades was waiting in his study with tea already poured. He did not ask about Louis. He talked about negotiations, how border disputes are settled, how you find the point where both sides can walk away without losing face, how the wrong word at the wrong time costs lives. He spoke as if I would need this knowledge soon. I spent the remaining week learning. Warner taught logistics, supply chains, seasonal taxation, drought planning. Hades taught diplomacy, how to listen for what a person needs underneath what they are demanding. I took notes. I asked questions. I let the work fill the space that the confrontation had emptied. Hector returned from the Frontline base after a week. The ceasefire had been reinstated. The rogue Imperial commander's ambition had been condemned even within his own empire. Prisoners were exchanged. No formal war, just one officer's greed and the wreckage it left behind. General Liebens has taken command again on their side, Hector told me over dinner. Their internal review is harsh. This will not happen again soon. I believed him. I also checked the border with my search magic every morning until the day we left. The magic ship touched down at the military facility outside the capital on a clear morning. We took carriages to the castle. The senior bureaucrats were brought before the king, the royal family, and the ministers for a formal commendation. When the group was dismissed, I was called to a reception room. The king was in good spirits. He leaned forward in his chair and told me plainly, the Thunderbullets barrage was the single greatest factor in preventing a full-scale war. 1 engagement, under an hour, no kingdom casualties, hundreds of enemy soldiers paralyzed without permanent injury. You followed Hector's commands precisely, the king said. You coordinated with the border commander without hesitation, and you healed both sides afterward without being ordered to. He paused. That is what a court mage does. He told me to rest. Aside from necessary treatments, I was to do nothing for 2 weeks. February had barely started. There were births coming. Arthur's wife and Lucas's wife both due this year. I bowed. I thanked him, and I left the castle feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The carriage pulled up to the mansion. Hannah had the door open before the wheels stopped turning. Cynthia was in the entrance hall. Chris was beside her. They must have been waiting since the messenger arrived because neither of them had coats on. They had not gone outside, just stood there, watching the door. Cynthia reached me first. She grabbed my arm with both hands and pulled me forward and did not say a word. Chris caught the other arm. Her fingers dug in hard enough that I felt them through the coat. Neither of them asked what happened. Not yet. They just held on. Slaw climbed from my shoulder onto Cynthia's head and sat there like a small glowing hat. Chris made a sound that might have been a laugh. Hannah appeared behind them. Reception room, she said. I have food ready. You can talk there. I let them pull me inside. My arms were pinned and my bag was still on my shoulder, and the hallway smelled like fresh bread and candle wax. I could feel the grip of their hands. Warm, immediate, real. I had done enormous things this week. Stopped an army, confronted my father, closed an account I had carried since I was 6 years old. But what undid me, what made my throat tighten and my eyes burn, was 2 people grabbing my arms in a hallway because they had been worried and could not wait another second to know I was back. I was home. The king had said to rest. I lasted 3 days before I was at Grandmother Francis's door with Slaw on my shoulder, and a full report I had already half rehearsed on the carriage ride over. Francis met me in the sitting room with tea already poured. She had heard, not all of it, but enough. The border clash, the Thunderbullets. My father tied up with 4 other nobles at dawn. News traveled fast in the capital when it involved disgrace. You confronted him, she said. Not a question. I told him the truth. I set my cup down, that he started this himself, that morning with the carriage. Her hand covered mine on the table. She did not ask how it felt. She already knew. Instead, she told me Cynthia's wedding plans were moving forward, that the groom treated her well, that the family was kind. She told me Rout was walking now and had a habit of grabbing Slaw's smaller copies whenever they wandered past her ankles. I was halfway through my second cup when a servant appeared with a sealed message. The Queen Mother's personal stationery, urgent. Frances read it twice, then looked at me over the top of the page. Marriage pressure, she said. A count named Okaneski has been visiting the Queen Mother directly, pushing for your hand, or rather, pushing his daughter at you through every available channel. Mine specifically, you are a court mage, a baron, 11 years old, and unmarried. She folded the letter. To a certain kind of noble, you are a winning lottery ticket that has not been claimed. We left within the hour. Cynthia joined us in the carriage. The Queen was waiting with Chris's family already seated. Chris was in a cream-colored dress she clearly hated. Her posture said training uniform. Her clothes said formal audience. She caught my eye when I walked in and lifted her chin the way she did when she was pretending not to be nervous. The Queen outlined it simply. Okaneski had been visiting the Queen Mother 3 times a week for a month. Each visit escalated. The Queen Mother's patience had ended. The solution the royal family proposed: announce our engagement at the appreciation party for the border mission 3 days from now. I looked at Chris. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Chris's family has been consulted, the Queen said. Her mother nodded. Her father, Baron Diner, had apparently said yes before she finished asking. Frances provided the formal family approval on my side. That was the mechanism. 2 baronies, both willing, the king as witness. The king himself will announce it, the Queen added. Personally, at the party, Chris's mother leaned toward her daughter. Breathe, dear, Chris breathed. We went to the Queen Mother's chambers afterward. The door was already open. Inside, a large man in an expensive coat was leaning over the Queen Mother's tea table, speaking too loudly about his daughter's accomplishments. The Queen Mother's face could have frozen a lake. When we entered and the Queen announced the engagement, the room temperature changed. Slaw floated forward without being asked. The Count found himself wrapped in binding magic and drifting toward the door, feet 6 inches off the ground, still sputtering. Lucas and Ellen handled the rest. Tax evasion charges, already on file. Arrest executed before the man's shoes touched marble again. The Queen Mother closed her eyes and exhaled. Finally, she said. 3 days later, the appreciation party. The hall was full. Senior officials from the border mission, Hector in dress uniform, military staff who had coordinated the ceasefire. I stood near the back wall with Slaw and tried not to count how many people were watching me. The king spoke for 10 minutes about the border incident. He named Hector's command decisions. He praised the slime's interception. Then he paused, and the room went quiet in a way that meant everyone already knew what was coming. Baron Astor, the king said, and the daughter of Baron Diner. He announced the engagement himself, not through a herald, not through a letter read aloud. The king of the Hawkstar Kingdom, standing at the front of a banquet hall with 200 witnesses, spoke our names together and called it done. The room erupted, not with shock, with confirmation. Apparently, half the capital had been waiting for this since Chris started spending 3 days a week at my mansion. Noble ladies descended on Chris within seconds. I lost sight of her behind a wall of gowns and exclamations. Slaw drifted over the crowd and reported back. They were romanticizing the story of how we met, getting most of the details wrong, and Chris was answering in single syllables. I ended up talking with the senior officials from the border. They felt guilty for attending, said they had only done paperwork while I fought. Hector told them their paperwork kept the supply line running and to stop apologizing. Then Chris appeared at my elbow. She had escaped. You were talking, she said, without me. I was standing in one place. You could have found me earlier. Her jaw tightened. You should have waited. I did not entirely understand what she meant. The audience did. New Year's Day. I turned 12. I visited Frances and Ellen first, held Root, who ran at me the moment I walked in and demanded to be lifted. Then, Grandfather Ellen and I went to the palace for a private meeting with the king and Arthur. The king told me in the same voice he used for supply reports. Flat, efficient. My father had died in prison. All 5 luxury faction heads had died the same way. They refused the forced labor, were transferred to a harsher facility, fell ill. The other prisoners, men serving real sentences for real crimes, had no patience for nobles who complained about work they considered beneath them. Arthur filled in the rest. The conditions worsened quickly. The forced labor was meant to be survivable. Refusing it was not. I sat with that for a moment. The office was very quiet. "What happens to the estate?" I asked. The king watched me. Then he answered. The fines had still not been paid. Grant had been notified. Installment plans had been offered. He had responded to none of them. The king would summon him to the palace tomorrow and explain, one final time, what happened to people who ignored a direct royal order. "Thank you for telling me," I said. That was all. I did not cry. I did not feel relief. I felt the same thing I had felt at the border when I told Louis that he had started this himself. The sense of a door that had been open for 6 years finally clicking shut. Not with a slam, just a click. That evening at the New Year's party, I told Chris and Cynthia about the royal twins being energetic and demanding. I did not mention Louis. She already knew. Slaw had told her slimes on the carriage ride back, and her slimes had told her. That was how it worked now. Slaw handled the things I did not say out loud. First training day of the new year. Lucas and Hector arrived looking like they had not slept. They had spent the morning at the palace, re-notifying Grant about his penalties, offering the installment plan one more time, explaining what seizure meant. Grant had said nothing useful. We sparred to shake it off. Lucas against me, Hector against Chris and Slaw. An hour of clean movement. No magic for me, wooden swords only. Lucas praised Chris's footwork. It had changed since the border. Faster, lower center. Then the training ground gate slammed open. Grant was standing there, breathing hard, eyes locked on me. He blamed me for everything. His father's death, his own penalties, the family name. He said it all the way across the courtyard, loud enough for every soldier in earshot to hear. None of it was new. He had been saying versions of this since I was 6 years old. Then he drew his sword, a real one, steel. Hector stepped forward, but not to stop it. He looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at me. "Conditions," Hector said. "Wooden swords. No magic for Ken. One bout." Grant accepted because he had no choice but to accept. He had walked in with a drawn blade in front of 200 witnesses. Refusing now meant immediate arrest for threatening a court mage. We swapped to wooden swords. The ring of soldiers widened. It lasted less than 2 minutes. Grant was not trained. He had not been drilling. He was angry and exhausted and running on 4 years of resentment instead of muscle memory. I sidestepped his first swing, deflected his second, and waited for him to tire. He swung wide. I stepped inside the arc and locked his wrist. He threw the wooden sword, tried to punch me with his free hand. I caught his arm, pivoted, and used a shoulder throw. He went over my hip. For a fraction of a second, his head was dropping toward the cobblestones at an angle that would have cracked bone. I caught him, one hand behind his neck, redirecting the fall. He hit the ground on his back instead of his skull. The air left his lungs. His eyes went wide, not from pain, but from the fact that I had just saved him from his own momentum. I stepped back. Hector was already moving. 2 soldiers lifted Grant by the arms. He was taken to a detention cell before his breathing evened out. "Forced search," Hector said to Lucas. "The non-payment after direct notification is a violation of the king's order. We have legal cause." Lucas nodded. The order went out within the hour. 3 days after the training ground, the estate search turned up everything: hidden assets, unreported income, and my mother's jewelry, a necklace and a ring that had been listed as lost after her death. The fines were paid from seized assets. Grant was court-martialed, salary reduction, noble pension halved for 5 years, transfer to the border training facility under supervision. The Guyan estate was formally marked for future seizure, and then the servants came. Former Guyan household staff, 12 of them, standing at my front gate asking for employment. They saw what I had become and made their calculation. I let them into the entrance hall. They stood in a line. Some of them I recognized. The woman who never brought food on time. The man who looked the other way when Grant hit me. The one who told Hannah she was wasting effort on a boy who would not live past 10. Slaw floated along the line. Appraisal magic confirmed what I already suspected. Embezzlement on 8 of them. Fraud on 3. 2 were wearing my mother's earrings. "You came here," I said, "because you saw an opportunity. Not one of you has apologized." I used binding magic, all 12, simultaneously. The military arrived within 20 minutes. I had sent word through Gordon before the interview started. Hannah was in the hallway behind me. She had been watching. "The ones who were not involved," I said. "Interview them separately. If they are clean, they can stay. 5 were clean. They stayed. Hannah was made head servant, formally, with the title and the keys and the authority. She had been doing the work since the day she arrived. Now, the house acknowledged it. I watched the arrested servants loaded into a military wagon through the front window. It was not satisfying. It was not painful. It was just what needed to happen. The last piece of a house that should never have stood being cleared away so something honest could grow in its place. Chris came by that evening. She did not ask about the servants or the search. She asked if I wanted to spar. We trained in the East Garden until the light failed. Wooden swords, no magic, just footwork and timing. She was getting faster. I told her so. She told me I was getting predictable with my left side feints. Afterward, sitting on the stone bench with our breath visible in the cold air, she said, "Your brother is gone." "Yes." "Your father is gone." "Yes." She pulled her knees up on the bench. Slaw settled in her lap, glowing faintly in the dusk. "Good," she said, "just that." Then she leaned her shoulder against mine for 3 seconds, stood up, and went inside to wash her hands before dinner. Francis came for lunch the next day. Cynthia sent a letter about wedding fabrics. The twins at the palace were crawling now and had learned to grab anything within reach, including the king's sash during an audience, which apparently caused the most dignified man in the kingdom to laugh out loud for the first time anyone could remember. I was 12 years old. I was engaged. My father was dead in a prison. My brother was in military detention. The servants who had watched me bleed were in custody. Hannah ran my house. Chris claimed the East Garden 3 days a week. Everything that needed to end had ended. What came next was mine. The magic ship lifted from the capital's military platform, and the city fell away beneath us like a map folding itself shut. Chris pressed her face against the porthole and watched the rooftops shrink. Slaw settled on my shoulder and let out a small, satisfied pulse of warmth. Beasley sat across from us with his arms folded, already reviewing patrol documents from the territory we were headed to. Grandfather Ellen was beside him, spectacles on, running a finger down a column of numbers in a ledger he had requested 3 days before departure. The two of them had been doing this since dawn. I had offered to help. Ellen told me to sit down and enjoy being 12 for another hour. Chris pulled back from the window. "Nash finally picked someone," she said. Father almost cried. "Your brother getting engaged is not going to make your father cry." "You did not see his face," she grinned. "He looked like someone had told him the war was over." The flight took most of the afternoon. Chris fell asleep against my arm somewhere over the Central Plains, her ponytail brushing my sleeve. I did not move. Slaw did not move. The cabin was warm, the hum was steady, and for a little while, the world was just sky and silence. The ship touched down outside the territory garrison, and the mood changed before we had even stepped off the ramp. A soldier was running toward us, armor rattling, one hand raised. Beasley caught the report first. A wolf pack had hit a patrol unit on the eastern road, 5 soldiers wounded. The garrison medics had them stabilized, but 2 were losing blood faster than bandages could hold. "Ken, Chris." Beasley's voice was already different. Not father, not travel companion. "Commander. Horses are saddled. Eastern road, 3 leagues. Intercept whatever is left of that pack before it circles back." I looked at Chris. She was already tying her hair tighter. "Go," she said, not to me, to herself. We rode hard. Slaw flattened against my shoulder to reduce wind drag, and I cast wide area search magic as we moved. The road narrowed between birch trees, and I felt them before I saw them. More than 20 wolves, circling 5 soldiers who had formed a tight square with their shields up and their swords shaking. Slaw air bullets, widespread. The burst hit the pack like a wall of invisible fists. 10 wolves went tumbling. The soldiers flinched and then stared. I followed with binding magic, locking every wolf that was still standing in place. Their legs froze mid-stride, jaws snapping at nothing. Chris was already off her horse. Her sword caught fire along its edge, mana burning white-hot, and she moved through the restrained wolves with efficient, deliberate strokes. Each one dropped. She did not look away, but her jaw was tight. I dismounted and went to the soldiers. 2 had deep bites on their forearms. 1 had a gash across his ribs. I healed them one at a time, watching torn muscle knit and blood stop flowing. "There is more." I said it before the last soldier's wound was closed. My search magic was pinging again. Wolves and something else. Something that moved in clusters. Goblins, coming from the forest line. 2 groups. Beasley's voice carried from behind us. He had caught up on horse horseback with a dozen garrison soldiers. Goblins pushing wolves out of their territory, he said, which means the nest is closer than anyone reported. Chris wiped her blade. Her face had gone flat and focused. I hate goblins. I know. They are disgusting. I know. She went anyway. 2 more engagements. I scattered them with wind magic, bound the survivors, and Chris finished every single one with her fire-imbued sword while making a sound somewhere between a growl and a complaint. By the time the road was clear, we had eliminated over 40 creatures, and Chris looked like she wanted to wash her hands for a week. I healed the 5 original soldiers properly. Deep tissue, bone fractures I had missed in the initial sweep. They watched me work with the same expression I had seen 100 times before. The one that said they did not understand how a 12-year-old was doing this, but were not going to argue. We returned to the garrison expecting to rest. Instead, we found chaos. Grandfather Ellen was standing in the magistrate's office across the street from the military base, directing soldiers who were carrying armfuls of ledgers and sealed document boxes. His spectacles were pushed up on his forehead, and he was dictating notes to a clerk faster than the man could write. "Ah, you're back." Ellen glanced at me. "The magistrate is in custody." I stopped walking. "Already?" "He thought we were arriving tomorrow." Ellen allowed himself the smallest smile. He was in his sitting room discussing bribery terms with 3 town merchants when we walked in. Slaw's companion confirmed guilt on all 4 with appraisal magic. Binding magic handled the rest. The magistrate had been living well. His bedroom contained gold-threaded curtains, silk bedding imported from the eastern provinces, a wardrobe of formal jackets worth more than the territory's entire annual medical budget, and a lockbox with enough coin to fund 6 months of patrols that had never happened. I searched the annexes with Slaw and more coin, more documents. The double bookkeeping showed 60% patrol completion on paper. The reality was worse. Roads left unguarded for months, monster populations unchecked. Every wounded soldier, every displaced farmer, every wolf at the gate traced back to this man's greed. Beasley reported everything to the king via communication device that night. The king's response was immediate. Extend the stay, thorough patrols, reinforcements on the next ship. The magistrate and his associates would be transported to the capital at dawn. Several soldiers had been colluding. Slaw had already confirmed and detained them. The territory's collapse was not one man's failure. It was a system of silence. We slept on the magic ship that night, emergency beds folded from the cabin walls. Chris was asleep within minutes. I lay awake a little longer, listening to the garrison sounds outside and thinking about how many people had been hurt because one man decided his comfort was worth more than their safety. Slaw woke me before dawn, a poke against my cheek, then a harder poke, then the unmistakable pulse that meant danger. I cast wide area search while still half asleep and felt my stomach drop. Over 50 goblins, moving toward the gate, and at their center, something larger. Something that radiated a presence the smaller ones orbited like moths around a torch. A goblin king. The alarm sounded. I was dressed and running before it finished its first cycle. Chris met me in the corridor, eyes still half closed, sword already in her hand. Beasley was behind her, fully awake, face grim. We reached the wall. Archers and mages were already firing into the dark, and the goblins shrieked back. Slaw scaled the wall and began launching air bullets into the mass below. The smaller goblins fell in clusters, but the king kept moving forward, shrugging off arrows like rain. "Ken, Chris," Beasley pointed at the king. "Maximum firepower. Draw it away from the horde. I need it isolated." Chris and I dropped from the wall on the far side, flanking wide. I cast a burst of immobilizing magic across the king's path, freezing the goblins around it and forcing it to turn toward us alone. It was tall, taller than Beasley, armored in something like bark and bone, with a jaw that split too wide. I did not look at it longer than I needed to. Chris was already moving. 3 years of training with her father and grandmother. 3 years of fire-imbued strikes drilled into muscle memory. I hit the Goblin King with another wave of binding magic, locking its legs for 2 seconds. That was all she needed. Her sword came down in a single arc. Fire erupted along the blade, and the strike landed clean. The Goblin King did not get back up. The soldiers finished the rest. By the time the sun crested the tree line, the field was quiet. Chris sat on the wall steps with her sword across her knees and her eyes closed. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for a while. Beasley found us there. "The false patrol reports," he said quietly. 60% on paper. The missing patrols are why that nest grew unchecked for months. Every goblin at that gate, every wolf on that road, Every wounded soldier in that territory. One man's signature on a ledger. I nodded. I already knew, but hearing it said aloud made it heavier. A week later, the reinforcement unit had taken over. The roads were clear. The patrols were real. Lucas arrived personally on a magic ship to oversee the corruption case and told us we had done enough. The hot spring village was an hour's ride south. I used search magic to confirm the area was safe, and then I stopped thinking about goblins for the first time in days. The restaurant served deer hot pot with a miso base. Beasley ordered for everyone. The broth was rich and dark. The meat fell apart in the bowl, and Chris ate 3 servings before anyone could comment. Ellen and Beasley immediately began arguing about which seasonings to buy so their wives would not ask why they came home empty-handed. "We need the miso paste," Ellen said. "And the dried herbs," Beasley added. "If I come back from a hot spring without dried herbs, I am sleeping in the study." I made a mental note to bring the recipe back for Hannah. The hot spring itself was outdoor, large, and crowded even after lunch. The water was perfect. Not too hot, not mineral heavy. Chris settled into the pool beside me and asked a question about whether I preferred a certain physical attribute in women. I told her she was 12 and still growing, and that the men staring across the pool looked undignified. She accepted this with a satisfied nod that suggested she had gotten exactly the answer she wanted. Ellen and Beasley pretended they had not heard any of it. We soaked until our fingers wrinkled. The slimes floated on the surface like small glowing buoys, pulsing contentedly. For one afternoon, nobody was hurt, and nobody needed healing, and nobody was lying about anything. It was enough. The magic ship carried us home the next morning. Chris fell asleep against my shoulder again. Ellen and Beasley watched us from across the cabin with expressions that were trying very hard to be stern and failing completely. We reported to the king in the throne room. He listened to everything: the wolves, the goblins, the magistrate's arrest, the goblin king, the false patrol reports, the scope of the embezzlement. His expression darkened at the corruption and lightened at the resolution. He told us a formal audience with medals would follow in the coming days. We moved to a reception room afterward. The babies swarmed me immediately. Root crawled into my lap. The royal twins grabbed at Slaw from either side. Lucas's son Joseph arrived in his mother Celia's arms and reached for me with both hands. I held 3 children and a slime and could not move for 10 minutes. Chris handed out hot spring souvenirs. Cynthia smelled the dried herbs and declared she was jealous. The Queen Mother asked about the hot pot recipe, and I promised to send it to her kitchen. Then Slaw poked my arm, twice. The way that meant pay attention now. I looked at the Queen. She was sitting in her usual chair, smiling at the chaos of children and gifts, one hand resting on her midsection in a way that could have been nothing. I cast appraisal magic, quietly, just a whisper of mana. She was pregnant. I blinked, looked at her again. She caught my gaze and her smile changed, warmer, a little sheepish. "Your Majesty," I said carefully. She laughed. "I was going to wait," she said, "but your slime is too perceptive for secrets." The room went silent. Then, not silent at all. The king stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with Beasley. Cynthia covered her mouth. The Queen Mother stood up so fast her tea sloshed. "I wanted another child," the Queen said simply. "Watching my grandchildren grow made me certain." The king crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hand without saying a word. His face said everything. The room erupted into something between congratulations and happy chaos, and nobody managed to finish a sentence for several minutes. The formal audience came 3 days later. The hall was full. Nobles, military officers, and the garrison soldiers who had fought beside us at the wall. The king stood and announced the corruption case. The magistrate had maintained double ledgers, embezzled territory funds, bribed soldiers to falsify patrol reports, and attempted to bribe the personnel office for a transfer before his scheme collapsed. The goblin surge, the wolf attacks, the wounded soldiers, the road closures, all traced to one desk. The hall was silent, then murmuring, then outrage that settled into grim satisfaction as the king announced the sentence would be severe. Then he called our names: Beasley, Ellen, Chris, me. We stepped forward. The king pinned a medal on each of us, small silver discs etched with the kingdom's crest, for service in eliminating the Goblin King, restoring the territory's roads, and uncovering the corruption that endangered royal subjects. Chris stood straight beside me, chin up, eyes forward. Her father was behind us in the audience, and I knew without looking that his face was doing the thing where he was proud and trying not to show it. The king also announced formally that Queen Liliana was expecting their 3rd child, due in autumn. A princess, they hoped. The hall erupted again, and this time the noise was pure joy. We walked out of the audience hall side by side. Chris's medal caught the light. So did mine. 12 years old, first mission medal, first field command, first Goblin King. Not bad, Chris said. Not bad, I agreed. Slaw pulsed once on my shoulder, warm and steady, the way that meant home. The year-end volunteer service was supposed to be ordinary. Chris and I set up in the nave of a church in the Noble District, the same routine we had done a dozen times before. Slaw sat on my shoulder, warm and steady. The royal children were there for their first charity experience. The twins toddling between adults, Joseph in his mother's arms, and baby Bianca sleeping through everything in her basket with the particular confidence of someone who had never known a single bad day. The Queen Mother supervised from a carved chair near the altar, watching the twins attempt their first healing on a noblewoman's stiff shoulder. They managed it together, 4 small hands pressing light into someone else's pain, and the old woman who received it bowed so deeply I thought she might not come back up. I treated the usual line: a merchant with a swollen knee, a horse with a cracked hoof, a bird someone's child had found on the street with a broken wing. Chris guarded the children's circle, arms crossed, scanning the room the way Beasley had taught her to scan a perimeter. Then Nash appeared at the church entrance in full military dress, and the warmth in the room shifted. He reported to the Queen Mother first. A raid was in progress 3 streets over, the Money Count's mansion. Illegal rare species breeding, financial crimes, months of investigation finally coming to a head. The soldiers had breached the building and found injured magical beasts in the basement, volatile ones. They would not let anyone approach. Nash turned to me. They need someone the beasts can trust. Your healing has a calming effect that we cannot replicate. The Queen Mother looked at me for exactly 1 second. Then she nodded. I left Chris with the children and followed Nash out the door. Slaw pulsed once on my shoulder. Not worry, not excitement. Readiness. The mansion's front door was already open when we arrived. Slaw had picked the lock in under 10 seconds, and the soldiers were inside. Nash found the hidden staircase behind a bookshelf in the study. I followed him down. The basement smelled like damp stone, and old straw, and something worse underneath both. Torchlight caught the bars of cages lining both walls. Inside them, a lion-maned beast the size of a horse, fur matted and ribs showing through. A forest tiger pair, both emaciated. A thunderhawk with one wing hanging wrong. A white wolf curled against the far corner, barely lifting its head. The soldiers had stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The beasts were growling, low, constant, the sound of creatures that had learned to associate humans with pain. Then I saw her, on the floor between the cages. A small figure, green hair spread around her head like weeds on stone. Bruises up her arms, across her face, layered in colors that told me they came from different days. She was not moving. I did not think about it. I walked past the soldiers, past the growling beasts, and knelt beside her. Slaw slid off my shoulder and positioned itself between me and the nearest cage. Not a barrier, a translator. It pulsed softly toward the lion beast. The growling dropped by half. I put my hands on the girl's shoulder and started healing. The damage was extensive. Old breaks layered over older breaks. Malnutrition deep enough that her body had started consuming itself. Bruises so frequent her skin had forgotten what its original color was. I worked from the inside out, stabilized what mattered, made sure she could breathe without pain. While I healed, the beasts went quiet, one by one. The lion settled first, then the tiger pair. Then the hawk folded its good wing. The white wolf lifted its head and watched me with yellow eyes that held something I recognized. Not hope, not yet. The thing that comes before hope. The realization that something different is happening. They had been protecting her, all of them, locked in their cages, starving. They had oriented themselves toward this one small person on the floor because she was the only human who had not hurt them. When she was stable enough to move, Nash called for a stretcher. As soldiers carried her toward the stairs, the Money Count's wife appeared at the top, shrill, demanding to know why a servant was receiving more attention than her family. Slaw pulsed. I used appraisal magic on the girl. She was not a servant. She carried the Money surname. She was a daughter, illegitimate, unregistered, hidden in a basement alongside the creatures she had been assigned to tend. The wife's protests cut off when the beasts growled in unison, not at me, at her. Nash had the wife and son detained as persons of interest. I stayed in the basement and fed the beasts from my storage magic until they stopped shaking. Hector authorized the transfer that afternoon, Mia and the beasts together to my mansion. The beasts would not separate from her, and nobody wanted a standoff. Slaw communicated the move to them. They followed the wagon without restraints. She woke that evening. I was sitting in a chair by the window when her eyes opened, green, the same shade as her hair, unfocused for a moment before they found me. "My name is Mia," she said. Her voice was small and careful, the way people speak when they have learned that words can trigger punishment. "I am an illegitimate child of the money count." She said it the way someone states a weather condition, not performing sadness, just reporting. I did not ask her anything. I sat where I was, quiet, and let her look around the room at her own pace. The clean sheets, the candle, the window with curtains instead of bars. Hannah brought food a few minutes later, a bowl of soup, bread, a glass of water. Simple things that did not demand anything from the person eating them. Mia ate slowly, watching the door between bites, as if it might lock itself. Through the window, she could see the garden where the beasts had already settled. King Leo, the lion, was lying in the grass with his mane spread around him, breathing deeply for what might have been the first time in months. The forest tigers pressed against each other near the hedge. The white wolf had found a patch of evening sun and was not moving from it. "I saw you once," Mia said. She was looking at the window, not at me. "When you came back from the border, I was 7. There was a high window in the house where I could see the main road. You were on a horse and you had blue hair and there was a slime on your shoulder and everyone was cheering." She paused. The bread in her hand had gone still. I thought maybe there were different kinds of lives. I did not say anything. There was nothing adequate to say to that. Slaw pulsed on my shoulder, a single warm throb that I felt all the way to my chest. Over the following weeks, the mansion shifted around Mia, the way water shifts around a stone dropped into a still pond. Not a disruption, just a new shape forming. Chris started conducting etiquette lessons alongside her. The Queen Mother came twice a week to instruct them both, patient and unhurried, correcting posture and address with the same warmth she had shown me when I first stood in a room full of nobles and did not know where to put my hands. The beasts settled. King Leo appointed himself guardian of the front garden, his presence enough to make delivery men walk a little faster. The Thunderhawk's wing heeled straight, and it began flying short circuits around the mansion roof at dawn. The forest tiger pair was expecting cubs. The white wolf followed Mia from room to room like a shadow with yellow eyes. Mia was given a desk in the study, exam preparation, the junior bureaucrat test, the same path I had taken years ago. She did not take up much space. Her handwriting was uneven because no one had ever taught her to hold a pen properly, and she practiced the grip exercises Hannah showed her with the same concentration I remembered giving to my first mana circulation drills in the closet. She did not ask for things. Not food, not blankets, not time. Everything had to be offered before she would take it. One afternoon, while Chris was reviewing her own exam materials across the table, Mia put down her pen and looked at me. "Am I supposed to feel grateful?" she asked. Not a challenge. A genuine question, asked the way someone asks about a rule they have not been told. "No," I said. "You do not owe anyone anything." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to her exercises. The white wolf pressed its nose against her ankle under the desk. The year-end volunteer service went smoothly until it did not. Near the end of the day, a cluster of noble ladies appeared at the church courtyard. They were not there to help. They loitered near the children's circle, watching the twins and Joseph with a particular kind of attention that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with positioning. Future marriage alliances, future proximity to the throne. The Queen Mother saw them before anyone else did. Her expression did not change, but her voice carried across the courtyard like a blade laid flat. She commanded the guards to form a perimeter around the children. Then King Leo appeared. He had followed our group from the mansion that morning. I had not told him to come, and I had not told him to stay away. He simply decided the children were under his protection and acted accordingly. When the first noble lady tried to step past the guard perimeter, with a sweet smile and an offered handkerchief. King Leo rose from where he had been lying beside the church wall and placed himself directly in her path. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood there, a lion the size of a horse, golden mane catching the gray afternoon light, looking at her with an expression that said very clearly that she was welcome to take one more step if she wanted to find out what happened next. She did not take one more step. The group of them retreated one by one to a safe distance and then left entirely. Cardinal Sion, who had been watching from the church steps, labeled them persons of concern for the church's records. Chris leaned toward me. I like that lion. New Year. Chris and I turned 13. Mia wore a proper dress for the first time, soft green, chosen by Hannah, fitted by the mansion seamstress. She stood between Hector and me as we entered the audience hall, and her hands were steady even if her breathing was not. We had taken her to Grandmother Francis's house first that morning, an anchor before the palace. Francis held Mia's hands and told her she looked beautiful, and Mia nodded once without speaking because the words were too large to answer. The audience hall was full. Nobles lined both sides. The king entered and delivered his New Year address. The year's events, the border stabilized, the territory corruption resolved, and then his voice dropped into a register I recognized. The register that preceded judgment. He announced the Money Count family's punishment. Mansion seized, assets confiscated, title dissolved. The Count, his wife, and their legitimate son stripped of rank and detained. Every word landed in the silence like a stone into deep water. Then, Mia, the Count's illegitimate daughter, was named provisional head of the reconstituted household. She would be protected at the Astor Baron estate until she achieved standing through the bureaucrat exam. Mia stood. The nobles around us shifted, some in surprise, some calculating. She walked forward 3 steps until she was visible to the entire hall. "I apologize," she said, her voice clear and steady in a way that cost her everything she had, "for the crimes committed by the family whose name I carry. I did not commit them, but I will not begin this duty by pretending they did not happen." She bowed to the court, deep, formal, held for 3 full breaths. Then she turned to me and bowed again. I did not know what to do with that, not in the moment, not with the whole court watching. It was not performed gratitude. It was something more specific than that, something closer to one person acknowledging that another person showed them the door existed before they knew they were allowed to walk through it. I bowed back. After the audience, nobles materialized in the corridor with transparent intent, approaching Mia with compliments that were really questions about her remaining financial assets. Hector stepped between them before the first one finished his sentence. King Leo, who had been waiting in the corridor as if he had known this would happen, positioned himself at Mia's other side. Ellen advised Mia to study for the junior bureaucrat exam under the gnome baronet household's guidance. The king endorsed the plan with a single nod. That evening, Mia stood in the garden with the forest tiger pressed against her leg. The last light was fading through the trees. King Leo dozed nearby. The thunderhawk circled once overhead, then settled on the garden wall. "I am going to be all right," she said to the tiger. She said it like she was practicing, like the words were a shape her mouth was learning to make. The tiger pressed closer against her knee, and Mia put one hand on its head without looking down. The gesture automatic, the trust already built in a place where no one else had been allowed to see it. I watched from the doorway and did not interrupt. Slaw pulsed once on my shoulder. Not worry, not pride, something quieter than both. Somewhere in the mansion behind me, Chris was reviewing exam materials at the kitchen table. Hannah was preparing tomorrow's breakfast. The white wolf was curled on the rug in the study, where Mia's desk waited with her pen and her exercises, and the life she was building one careful letter at a time. I thought about a storage closet, about a slime who wandered in and stayed, about the first time someone put their hand on my head and did not hit me. Different kinds of lives. She was right about that. A week after the New Year audience, we boarded the new magic ship from the military facility outside the capital. The ship was faster than the old one, smoother too. Nash had pushed the engineers for months, and it showed. Once we reached cruising altitude, Lucas spread a map across the conference table. 3 days. Visit the Garforce territory, inspect the border, treat any wounded soldiers, and return home. Routine. Chapter 4, I said, sliding the study booklet across to Chris. She groaned but opened it. Nash sat across from us pretending to read his own material, but I caught him staring out the porthole every 30 seconds. Lucas had submitted Nash's application for the advanced bureaucrat exam without telling him. Chris had the same exam hanging over her head. They looked like prisoners sharing a cell. I quizzed Chris on administrative precedent while Slaw perched on my shoulder and corrected her pronunciation of legal terms by bouncing once for wrong, twice for right. By afternoon, she was getting most of them without the bounce. The ship landed at the Garforce territory by evening. We were supposed to visit the estate the next morning. We did not visit the estate. A junior officer whispered something to Lucas the moment we touched down at the Garforce base. Lucas's expression did not change, but his hand closed around the map he was holding. He canceled the estate visit in the same breath. We were airborne again within the hour. He explained it on the way. The Empire had tripled its troop concentration at the border. Intelligence confirmed a coup within the Empire. The war faction had imprisoned the moderate new emperor. They were using the border buildup to force a military victory before diplomacy could resolve the situation. When the ship landed at the frontier base, Commander Wallace was already waiting on the platform. His face told us everything before his mouth did. The saturation assault had begun that morning. Cannon magic bombardments, wave attacks, continuous pressure on the barrier wall. The troops were holding, but barely. They needed what I could do, and they needed it now. I do not remember climbing the wall. I remember being on top of it. Cannon magic came in arcs from the Imperial side, heavy spheres of compressed force, each one capable of cracking stone if it hit clean. Slaw intercepted the first volley before I had even raised my hands. The barrier shimmered blue-green where Slaw's body absorbed the impact. I pushed wind magic outward, not a wall, a redirection. The next volley curved away from the barrier and detonated harmlessly in the air above the tree line. Then the next, then the next. Chris fought beside me. Her fire sword carved through the smaller bullet magic projectiles that slipped past the main interceptions. She did not speak. Neither did I. There was nothing to say that mattered more than what our hands were already doing. The assault did not stop at dusk. It did not stop at full dark. The Empire's war faction had volume instead of precision. They threw everything at the wall and waited for something to crack. Nothing cracked. Slaw was faster than their aim. The chibi slimes covered the sections I could not reach. Chris cut down anything that came at angles. The soldiers behind us fired back when they could, rested when they had to. I lost count of the hours. When it finally stopped, sometime after midnight, my magic reserves were nearly empty. I sat down on the wall because my legs would not hold me anymore. Slaw climbed onto my chest. Chris sat next to me and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. I woke on the sofa in the commander's room. Someone had covered me with a blanket. Slaw was asleep on my chest, a warm weight I had felt in my sleep without knowing it. The facility was quiet. I found the cafeteria. An old woman behind the counter gave me bread and juice without asking what I wanted. She looked at me like she knew something I did not. Then the alarm sounded. I was on the wall before the second alarm finished. The Empire was firing cannon magic again. The same pattern, volume, pressure, waiting for something to give. Slaw intercepted. I redirected with wind. Lucas arrived with Chris and the other slimes within minutes. Nash and Wallace were handling command below. I looked at the Imperial camp through the smoke. They were spread wide, disorganized. Officers shouting at clusters of mages who fired without coordination. The war faction had numbers, but not discipline. I can end this, I said to Lucas. He looked at me. I explained. Thunderbullets, non-lethal, calibrated to disrupt coordination and paralyze anyone in the blast radius. If I fired them into the camp itself, the assault would collapse. Do it, Lucas said. I prepared the volley, gathered what magic I had recovered overnight, shaped the thunderbullets the way I had trained for 4 years, raised my hands toward the Imperial camp. A shout from behind me, a voice I had heard in a closet, in a hallway, in a training ground, a voice that had never once said anything worth hearing. Grant was at the perimeter. He was in a rear border unit, one of the postings from his court-martial. He should not have been anywhere near the combat zone. He threw a knife. It fell short by 3 meters. He could not even do this competently. Chris was already moving. She crossed the distance between us and Grant in a breath. Her hands caught his wrist before he could reach for a second weapon. She twisted. He went down. She pinned his arms behind his back and held him against the stone while the guards arrived. 3 seconds. That was all it took. 7 years of training arriving in 3 seconds. Lucas did not look at Grant. He looked at me. Fire, he said. I fired. The first volley of thunderbullets arced over the wall and struck the Imperial camp. Flashes of light, the sound of coordination collapsing. I fired again and again. Every volley I had built in 4 years of practice released in sequence. The Empire's assault did not slow. It stopped completely. The officers on the other side were on the ground. The mages were on the ground. Everyone in that camp who had been throwing magic at our wall was unconscious and unhurt. The kingdom troops went over the wall and into the paralyzed lines. It was over in under 2 hours. Grant was bound, stripped of his weapon, and escorted to the magic ship for transport to the capital. Unauthorized entry to the combat zone. Attempted assault on a court mage during active engagement. Multiple charges. He would not see the border again. I stood on the wall and looked at the soldiers around me. They were looking back, waiting, not for orders, for something else. I am sorry, I said. My voice cracked on the second word. For my family, for what he did, for the fact that Chris had to intervene because of someone who shares my blood. Nobody said anything. I meant the apology comprehensively. For every time a Gyan had made someone else clean up their mess. For every time my existence had dragged someone I cared about into a fight that was not theirs. I sat down on the wall. My legs gave out the same way they had the night before, except this time it was not exhaustion. It was 7 years of carrying a name that never stopped trying to destroy me. Slaw climbed into my lap. The chibi slimes appeared from somewhere and settled on my shoulders, my arms, the stone beside me. Chris sat down close enough that her shoulder touched mine. She did not say it was okay. She did not say it was not my fault. She just sat there, which meant more than any words could have. Lucas put his hand on my shoulder. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said it. It is over. The Gian family is done. You have nothing left to answer for. His hand stayed on my shoulder. You are free, Ken, I cried. Not the way I had cried when I was 6, in a prince's reception room, unable to stop. This was different. This was the last wall coming down inside me, the one I had built to hold the weight of a family that never wanted me. It fell, and there was nothing on the other side of it except the people who were sitting with me right now. 3 days after the battle ended, we crossed to the Imperial camp for the ceasefire negotiation. General Lebens led the Imperial delegation. He walked with a severe limp. His left arm ended below the elbow. The other Imperial officers were also wounded. Bruised faces, splinted limbs. One had a bandage wrapped around most of his head. This was not what the kingdom had done to them. This was what their own war faction had done before launching the attack. I did not ask permission first. I looked at Lucas. He nodded once. I walked to General Lebens. May I said. He looked at me, at the stump of his arm, at me again. He sat down in the nearest chair and extended what remained. I placed my hands on the end of the stump and began. Bone first, then muscle, then nerve, then skin. It took longer than most healings because the amputation was old enough that the body had started to seal over. I worked through it layer by layer until 5 fingers flexed in front of us. Lebens did not move for a long moment. He looked at his hand, opened it, closed it, opened it again. Then he looked at me with an expression I had seen many times before, but never from an enemy general. Are you truly a person? He asked, not an insult. A genuine question from a man staring at something he could not explain. Yes, I said, I am. Lebens explained the coup while I healed his officers one by one. The war faction had imprisoned the moderate emperor, attacked the moderates, used the border buildup as a weapon before the political situation could stabilize. The war faction commanders were now either dead, captured by the kingdom, or fled. The moderate faction was reasserting control. Prisoner exchange terms were simple. The Empire held no kingdom prisoners. All Imperial prisoners in kingdom custody would be returned. Ken's thunderbullets had left them unconscious and unhurt. The kingdom's claim was clean. Hector handled the negotiation details. The man who had lost his own hand once and watched a boy grow it back. Now, he sat across from an Imperial general with 2 working hands and negotiated a ceasefire with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this before. After the terms were settled, I asked if there were other wounded among the Imperial forces. Lebens said the remaining injured were at the field hospital behind the camp. I went. Slaw came with me. I healed Imperial soldiers for the rest of the afternoon. Men who had been firing cannon magic at our wall 2 days ago watched me close their wounds and asked nothing. Some of them looked at the barrier wall visible through the tent flap. Then they looked at me. Then they looked away and let me work. There was nothing to say. I healed them because they were hurt, and I was here. The category did not change the fact of the wound. We stayed 2 days at the Garforce estate to rest and finalize the paperwork. Then the ship brought us home. I expected a quiet debrief in Lucas's office. We were led to the grand audience chamber instead. Nash and Chris both stopped walking when they saw the size of the room. The nobles filling the gallery, the formal arrangement. The king stood at the far end. He commended Hector for the negotiation. He commended Nash and Chris for their contributions. The Diner family's name rose in the room like something you could touch. Then he spoke my name, formally, publicly. The blue healer who had repelled 2 days of saturation assault and secured the kingdom's decisive victory without escalation. The nobles applauded. I stood very still and let it wash past me the way I always did. Afterward, in the private reception room, the king told me quietly that my elevation to Viscount would wait until Grant's trial concluded. The Guyane case needed to be fully closed. I nodded. I had not asked for the elevation. I did not need it to know what I was. The children found me before I found them. Joseph reached me first, then Bianca, carried by her nurse, but leaning so far toward me that the nurse gave up and handed her over. The twins were behind them, small hands on my coat, small voices saying my name. I knelt on the carpet with a baby in one arm and a toddler hanging off the other, and 3 royal children trying to climb onto my shoulders where the slimes usually sat. Chris laughed behind me. It was the first real laugh I had heard from her since the knife. 7 years ago, I was in a closet. Now I was on a carpet with more children than I had arms for, and every single one of them was glad I came home. That was freedom, not the title, not the commendation, not the war ending, just this. The room full of people who chose me, and the fact that I could finally believe they meant it. 2 months after the border battle, the trial opened. Mia and I sat in a small observation room behind enchanted glass, the kind that looks like a plain wall from the other side. Grandfather Ellen was beside us, arms crossed, watching the courtroom below with an expression I had come to recognize as quiet exhaustion. Slaw rested on my lap. Nobody spoke. The money count came first. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, grayer. His shoulders caved in like a man who had already been sentenced inside his own head. The charges were read in a flat judicial tone. Systematic bribery, illegal brokerage across 3 territories, exploitation of classified monster resources, 60% of his assets seized, demotion from Count to Viscount, 10 years of forced labor, his family reduced to commoner status. Mia did not flinch. She watched with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still, and when the judge confirmed that she would serve as provisional head of the reconstituted Money Viscount household, upon passing her exam, her chin lifted by a fraction. That was all. Then they brought Grant in. He was still shouting before he cleared the door, still blaming me, still insisting none of this was his fault, that I had disrupted his sleep with an explosion, that I had stolen the family name, that I was the reason everything had gone wrong. The guards on either side of him looked bored. He saw the glass panel. He should not have been able to see through it, but something in his expression shifted, some animal recognition, and he turned toward the king's elevated seat and screamed. He told the king to die. He told the king to apologize. The courtroom went still. The judge looked at the king. The king's expression did not change. He said simply, to apply the law as it was written. Criminal slavery, life forced labor, the harshest available facility. Grant was removed from the room. He was still shouting when the door sealed behind him. The sound cut off like a closed book. Grandfather Ellen exhaled. I exhaled at the same time. We looked at each other and almost smiled. Afterward, the king told me that only the criminal deserved blame, not me, not the name I had built beside it. I nodded. Slaw pressed gently against my stomach. It was over. Not with satisfaction, not with relief exactly, just over. A weight I had been carrying since I was 6 years old, and now the floor it rested on was gone. The Guyane estate looked worse than I expected. The gardens were overgrown past the knee. The front gate hung open. No guards, no staff visible from the road. Gordon walked ahead with 4 soldiers. I followed with Slaw on my shoulder. The military had sent the eviction notice weeks ago. 4 people had refused to leave. I used detection magic through the front door. 4 figures in the entrance hall. Slaw confirmed with appraisal, the butler and 3 servants. The ones who had watched me get beaten in that hallway and said nothing. The ones who had laughed when my brother kicked me down the stairs. The soldiers entered. Gordon confronted them formally. The butler stood in the center of the hall with his chin raised, wearing a necklace I recognized, my mother's necklace. Slaw's appraisal confirmed it. The jewelry belonged to the estate inventory, documented, cataloged, legally the property of the house. Wearing it was provable embezzlement. The butler saw me watching him and started shouting. He called me ungrateful. He said the mansion still belonged to the Guian family. I told him, as evenly as I could manage, that the Guian Knight family was extinct. His voice cracked on whatever he tried to say next. The soldiers took him. The other 3 went quietly. Gordon told me I had done the right thing. The slimes patted my head. I stood in the empty entrance hall for a moment, the same hall where I had been invisible for 6 years, and then I walked out. The Guian Knight family officially ceased to exist. I was exhausted, but the necklace was coming home. The exam day came in early autumn. Chris and Mia left together at dawn. Chris for the higher bureaucrat certification, Mia for the junior exam. Cynthia had gone the day before to sit alongside Nash at a different testing center. The mansion was quiet in that particular way it gets when the people who fill it are all somewhere else proving something. I stayed home. The royal twins arrived mid-morning with Joseph, and the queen mother followed with Bianca on her hip. 2 forest tiger cubs chased each other across the lawn. 4 wolf cubs tumbled in a pile near the fountain. The thunderhawk chicks, nearly grown now, almost ready to fly, perched along the garden wall and watched everything with sharp golden eyes. Bianca reached for me the moment she saw me. I held her. She was heavier than last month. We sat in the study, and I read picture books while 2 wolf cubs settled at my feet, and the twins argued cheerfully about which monster was fastest. Joseph fell asleep against the queen mother's arm. It was a simple morning, the kind I would not have been able to imagine at 6 years old. A room full of children who wanted to be near me. A woman who had known my mother watching over all of us, and nothing in the air except warmth. Everyone passed. Chris and Nash took the higher exam. Mia and Cynthia passed their respective levels. The news arrived by evening courier, and I read it aloud to Slaw, who bounced once on my shoulder. That was celebration enough. Mia left on a Tuesday. She had been arranging things for days. The formal transfer of the adult magical beasts to their permanent placements, the paperwork for the military registry, the household accounts she had been helping Hannah manage. She did it all without being asked. She did it the way someone packs who knows exactly where they are going. The carriage waited at the front gate. Her belongings fit in a single trunk, not much after everything. The adult monsters who would guard her stood in formation beside the carriage, patient and enormous. A young thunderhawk chick named P perched on the edge of the carriage roof, watching. Mia stood at the door in her green dress, the silver clip in her hair catching the morning light. She bowed to Hannah first, then to Chris, then to me. The monsters bowed with her, all at once, like a choreographed wave. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. "For everything." Chris stepped forward and hugged her before she could bow again. Mia's hands came up slowly, uncertain, then settled. Hannah wiped her eyes with her apron. Slaw bounced softly on my shoulder. I told her the household would miss her. I told her P would stay here and keep an eye on things for her. She smiled at that, small and real, and climbed into the carriage without looking back. The monsters fell into step. P lifted off the roof, circled once, then landed on my shoulder where Slaw usually sat. Slaw made room without complaint. I watched the carriage until it turned the corner. Then I went inside. The mansion was quieter. It was the right kind of quiet, the kind that meant someone had outgrown it and walked out on their own feet. I did not know about the speech. Hector had arranged it. The medal ceremony was straightforward. 3 soldiers receiving commendations for the border battle. The royal twins serving as official representatives for their first public function. I was there as their assistant. I helped them pin the medals. Arya was solemn and precise. Bright nearly dropped one and recovered with a grin that made the audience laugh. Then the announcer called my name. Speech on behalf of the recipient guests. I looked at Hector. He looked back at me with that expression he uses when he has done something deliberate and wants to see what happens. I walked to the podium. 3 soldiers stood before me with their new medals. Behind them, a room full of officers, nobles, officials. The twins in the front row watching. I had no notes. I had not prepared anything. I looked at the 3 soldiers and opened my mouth. When I was 6 years old, I said, I arrived at the border carrying a slime and a letter my father had written. The soldiers there did not treat me like a child. They did not treat me like a problem. I paused. The room was quiet. They treated me like a healer. And every time since then, every ward, every battlefield, every time someone was in pain, I tried to be what those soldiers believed I was. The silence held for a moment. Then the applause started. Not polite applause, but the kind that builds, that comes from somewhere real. The soldiers, the nobles, the twins clapping with their small hands. Hector in the back, not clapping, just watching me with that look I had learned to read as satisfaction. Afterward, he told me I had passed the test. Then he told me I was assigned another ceremony the following week. I went home and told Slaw about it. Slaw bounced. I was fairly certain that was sympathy. Autumn deepened and Cynthia got married. The great church was fuller than a baronet's wedding had any right to be. The royal twins sat in the second row with Joseph between them. Lucas stood in the back with his arms crossed and a faint smile he probably thought was invisible. Hector had a glass of something already. The Queen Mother sat beside Francis, the 2 of them speaking in low voices with the ease of women who had known each other a very long time. Chris and I stood at the entrance, greeting every guest as they came in. She wore her cream-colored dress and looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was standing. I wore my court mage coat because Hector had told me to, and I had learned by now that arguing cost more energy than compliance. Grandfather Ellen walked Cynthia to the altar. She wore white, a simple dress, not extravagant, but the way she moved in it made it look like something from a painting. Her hair was pinned with silver flowers. Her face was the happiest I had ever seen it. Gaia received her at the altar. He looked terrified in the best possible way. Vows, rings, a kiss that made the twins cover their eyes and made Frances press her handkerchief to her mouth. A long, clean wave of applause filled the church like breath. The reception was at the Medallion Estate. Chris and I guided guests while a 3-year-old named Root ran between every table at full speed, greeting every person she encountered with identical cheerful volume, regardless of whether they were a duke or a baker. Her parents followed at a reasonable distance, smiling the specific smile of people who had given up trying to contain her. The twins told Gaia, with great seriousness, that they were glad Cynthia had someone good. Gaia looked like he might cry. Lucas appeared behind him and said something I could not hear that made Gaia straighten immediately. Hector accepted another glass and looked at me across the room. That expression again, satisfaction, or something close to it. 7 years of watching a boy in a storage closet become whatever it was I had become. I nodded at him. He raised his glass a fraction of an inch. After cleanup, Gaia and Cynthia collapsed in the sitting room. Rout was asleep on a sofa with one shoe missing, her cheek pressed into the cushion. The hall was emptying. The candles were burning low. I stepped into the garden for a moment before the carriage came. The air was cold, October cold, the kind that smells like endings and beginnings at the same time. Light from the reception hall spilled through the windows behind me, golden and warm. Somewhere inside, Chris was laughing at something Frances had said. I could hear it faintly, that particular laugh she has when she is genuinely surprised by something. Slaw sat on my shoulder, the 2 of us in the dark, looking at nothing in particular. 7 years ago, I was in a storage closet. I had a slime and a bruise on my ribs, and a book I could barely read in the dark. I did not know what my mother's name was. I did not know there were people in the world who would choose to stand beside me without being paid or ordered to. Now, I was standing in a garden after my aunt's wedding, wearing a coat I had earned, with a ring on my finger that meant someone wanted to spend a life next to mine. Inside that hall were a grandmother, a queen, a mentor, a best friend, twin children who called me by name, and a 3-year-old asleep on a sofa who had greeted every single guest at this wedding with the same open, untrained joy. I built this, not alone, never alone, but I stayed. I kept healing. I kept showing up. And the people who came into my life stayed too. Slaw pressed warm against my neck. The carriage would come soon. Chris would find me out here and ask why I was standing in the cold. I would not have a good answer, and she would not need one. The light from inside was enough.